there is Betsy DeVos taking her seat right now.
Maybe you guys take two things.
The hearing of the Health, Education, Labor, and Pensions Committee will come to order. This is the hearing to consider the nomination of Betsy DeVos to be United States Secretary of Education. Senator Murray and I will make an opening statement. We'll introduce the nominee. We welcome Senator Scott, a member of this committee, Senator Lieberman, a distinguished former member of this body, who will make introductory remarks. And following the nominee's comments, we'll have a 5-minute round of questions. One note, we have Capitol officers here today who will remove anyone who attempts to disrupt the hearing. This is the first meeting of our committee in the new Congress. This is a committee, as will probably become evident as we go along, that has some considerable differences of opinion on a variety of issues. But we have found that we can sometimes resolve them in important ways. Last year, we passed what the Majority Leader, Senator McConnell, said was the most important bill of the Congress, 21st Century Cures. And the year before, a bill fixing No Child Left Behind, which President Obama called a Christmas miracle, plus 33 other bills signed by the President, 33 total. I want to thank Senator Murray and the Democrats, as well as the Republicans on the committee, for operating in that fashion. We've done that by showing courtesy to ourselves and to our witnesses, which I hope will be evident today. Before my opening remarks, I'd like to make a word about process. More than 25 years ago, Ms. DeVos, I was sitting where you are sitting, and as the nominee for U.S. Secretary of Education. And former Senator Howard Metzenbaum of Ohio said to me, "Well, Governor, I've heard some disturbing things about you, but I'm not going to bring them up here." Senator Nancy Kassebaum of Kansas looked at him and said, "Well, Howard, I think you just did." And with that, he put a secret hold on me and held me up for 2 or 3 months. You won't have to go through that because we abolished secret holds not long ago. And because we're going to apply what I would call the golden rule, the one that comes from the book of Matthew, which applies the same procedures to you that we used in 2001 and 2005 for President George W. Bush's Education Secretary nominees, and in 2009 and 2016 for President Obama's Education Secretary nominees. So we'll consider you and then vote, just as we did them. Arne Duncan, President Obama's first Education Secretary, the hearing was on the 13th of January, and he was confirmed a week later. John King, the hearing was on February the 25th, and he was confirmed 2.5 weeks later. We've received from Mrs. DeVos, and each senator has had available since January 4th, the committee's required forms. The rules require them to be in more than a week in advance. The FBI background check has been done, and Senator Murray and I have heard the results. Mrs. DeVos has provided the Office of Government Ethics on December 12th with all the relevant information about her financial affairs. We will have a letter from that office on how, which will be an agreement between Mrs. DeVos and that office, on how to deal with any conflicts of interest before we vote in committee on her nomination. Now, as for questions, Mrs. DeVos has met with each of us in our offices. Several of us have written questions already given to her. Today, we'll each have 5 minutes for further questions. Again, I'm applying the golden rule. 1 round of 5-minute questions, as was the case for both of President Obama's education nominees, was the case for me too in 1991. In those cases, following the 5-minute round, the chairman and 1 member ask additional questions, and we'll do that again as we did before. I'll ask questions, and I'll ask Senator Murray if she would like to do the same. Each of us will have a chance to ask additional questions in a reasonable number in writing by the close of business on Thursday at 5 p.m. And then we will meet in executive session next Tuesday to consider Mrs. DeVos's nomination and other business if the final Office of Government Ethics letter is received by this Friday in order to give senators a chance to review it before Tuesday. Now, following my opening remarks, Senator Murray will make hers, and then we'll hear from Senator Scott and Senator Lieberman, and then we'll hear from Mrs. DeVos. Betsy DeVos, in my opinion, is on our children's side. She's devoted her life to helping mainly low-income children have better choices of schools. Most of the criticism I've heard of her amounts to 3 things. 1, she supports public charter schools. 2, she supports giving lower-income parents more choices of schools for their children. And 3, she's used her considerable wealth and effectiveness to advance those ideas. I believe she's in the mainstream of public opinion, and her critics are not. First, let's take the idea of charter schools. They are public schools with fewer government rules, fewer union rules, so teachers have more freedom to teach and parents have more freedom to choose the school that best suits their child. Nothing new about it. In 1991 and 92, President H.W. Bush proposed start-from-scratch schools. He called them New American Schools. He raised $70 million for New American Schools Development Corporation to encourage innovative ideas. Then in 1993 in January, in my last act as President Bush's Education Secretary, I wrote every single superintendent in the country, and I asked them to try something that was invented in Minnesota by the Democratic Farmer Labor Party, something called charter schools. There were 12 of them then. Since then, there's been broad support for the idea. Albert Shanker, the late head of the American Federation of Teachers, endorsed those charter schools. In 1997, President Clinton said, We need 3,000 charter schools by 2002. Senator Hillary Clinton supported charter schools. President George W. Bush supported charter schools. President Obama supports charter schools. His first education secretary, Arne Duncan, described himself as a, quote, strong supporter of charter schools. John King, the current education secretary, founded a charter school or ran a system of charter schools. Congress in 1994, 98, 2001, 2015, always bipartisan, usually by huge margins, supported charter schools. 43 states and the District of Columbia operate charter schools. So over nearly 30 years, those 12 Democratic farmer labor charter schools in Minnesota have grown to 6,800 public charter schools. 6% of America's public school students attend them. So who's in the mainstream here? The Democratic Farmer Labor Party in Minnesota, Presidents Bush, Clinton, Bush, Obama, the last 6 U.S. education secretaries, the U.S. Congress, 43 states, the District of Columbia, Betsy DeVos, or her critics. I think pretty obviously she's in the mainstream. She's on the side of our children. Let's go to the other criticism. Giving low-income parents more choices of schools that wealthy Americans already have. More specifically, the objection is that public money shouldn't follow poor children to an accredited school of their parents' choice, public, private, or religious. Arguing against that is arguing against the most successful social policy this Congress has ever enacted, the GI Bill for veterans, which appropriated federal dollars to follow veterans to the school of their choice, Notre Dame, Yeshiva, Maryville College, University of Tennessee, any accredited institution. It produced the greatest generation, and it produced a model for all of our federal aid for colleges. $29 billion of Pell Grants this year are in vouchers. They follow the student to the school of their choice. Nearly $100 billion in new student loans follow the student to the school of their choice. Why is such a great idea for college students deemed to be such a dangerous idea for K through 12 students? Many of us believe competition produces the best colleges, and it might produce the best schools. Many scholars have suggested that. Ted Sizer, distinguished educator, suggested a Poor Kids Bill of Rights 40 years ago. Today, 50 states provide parents more choices of public schools. 15% attend a school other than their school of residence through open enrollment. 44 states allow sending children to public schools outside their district, 34 states within their district. In addition to that, nearly 400,000 children are served by 50 private school choice programs across 25 states, the District of Columbia, and Douglas County, Colorado. Congress passed bipartisan legislation with Senator Lieberman at the head of it, creating the D.C. School Voucher Program in 2003, to date helping 6,100 children, more than 1,000 children this year standing in line waiting for that opportunity. So there's been growing support since President H.W. Bush proposed the GI Bill for kids to let states who wanted to try expanding choice for low-income students, to today, where 2015, 45 United States senators supported the scholarships for kids that I proposed and that Senator Scott proposed for students with disability. 45 United States senators thought that was a good idea. According to the 2013 Luntz Global Public Opinion Survey, 73% of Americans support school choice. 64% say that if given the financial opportunity, they would send one or all their children to a different school. So who's in the mainstream here? The GI Bill for veterans, Pell Grants, student loans, both President Bush, the President-elect, 25 states, Congress, and the D.C. Voucher Program, 45 U.S. senators in 2015, 73% of Americans, Betsy DeVos, or her critics. Pretty obvious. She's in the mainstream. She's on the side of our children. The final criticism is she's used her wealth to support these ideas. I think she deserves credit for that, not criticism. Would her critics be happier if she'd spent her time and her money trying to deny children more choices of schools that wealthy families already have? We're fortunate that Betsy DeVos is the nominee for U.S. Education Secretary. She is and has been on our children's side. I support her confirmation and look forward to working with her. Senator Murray.
Well, thank you very much, Chairman Alexander. I look forward to working with you and all of our colleagues in Congress. I want to welcome our new members on this committee, Senators Kaine, Hassan, and Young, and thank you, Ms. DeVos, for joining us here today. And by the way, welcome to the rest of your family who I know has joined you as well. This is the first of many hearings that we will be holding on President-elect Trump's nominees to fill critical positions in the federal government. So I want to start by reiterating the importance of the Senate's role in this process and this committee's role in this Senate work. President Trump has the right to fill his cabinet with people he thinks will fill out the vision for our country. But that doesn't mean that the Senate should be a rubber stamp. To the contrary, we owe it to the people we represent to make sure every nominee is not only qualified for the position and free of conflicts of interest, but that he or she will put families and workers first, and not millionaires, billionaires, or big corporations. President-elect Trump was the first presidential candidate in decades to not release his tax returns, and he's openly flouting ethics conventions regarding his personal and family businesses. Now, some people say this means the bar has now been lowered for ethics in public service. I refuse to accept that, and I'm going to continue to hold the incoming administration to the highest ethical standards. This is what the American people deserve, regardless of who they voted for, where their tax dollars are going, and who is benefiting. I believe that in an administration where lines around potential conflicts of interest are very likely to be blurred at the top, they need to be even clearer at the individual agencies, even while we in Congress work to ensure the highest ethical standards are maintained and there is accountability to taxpayers from the top of the government all the way down. So I'm going to continue pushing for robust scrutiny of every one of these nominees, and I appreciate Ms. DeVos has said to me that she knows the importance of transparency and openness. She is committed to addressing every ethical concern and make sure that no corners are cut, and that she would go to great lengths to make sure no corners are cut. However, I am extremely disappointed that we are moving forward with this hearing before receiving the proper paperwork from the Office of Government Ethics. When President Obama entered the White House, Republicans insisted on having an ethics letter in hand before moving to a hearing. In fact, Leader McConnell wrote a letter to Leader Reid making that explicit demand: an ethics letter in hand with time to review and an FBI background check before a hearing was held. So I am extremely concerned, and I can only hope that cutting corners and rushing nominees through will not be the new norm. Now, we're here today to hear from President-elect Trump's nominee to lead the Department of Education. As a former preschool teacher and school board member, as well as a mom who got her start in politics fighting for public investments in early learning, I take this issue very seriously. I owe everything I have to strong public schools I was able to attend with my 6 brothers and sisters. And none of us in my family would have been able to go to college were it not for robust federal support. We had those opportunities because our government was committed to investing in us, but I know that's not the case for every student in every community today. So although we have a long way to go, I am absolutely committed to making sure that the federal government is a strong partner to our public schools, districts, and states, that every student has access to a high-quality public education that allows them to succeed, and that we focus our federal policies and investments on strengthening public schools for all students, and certainly not towards diverting taxpayer dollars to fund vouchers that don't work for unaccountable private schools. That is why I was so proud to work with Chairman Alexander and so many others here today to pass Every Student Succeeds Act, which gives flexibility to states and school districts, but also includes strong accountability for our schools and reiterates our nation's commitment to strengthening public education, especially for our most vulnerable students and communities. This commitment goes beyond K-12 too, of course, because the federal government in general and the Department of Education specifically has an important role to play in supporting, protecting and investing in all of our students, from our youngest learners to those in higher education, and adults and parents seeking to improve their skills mid-career. So leading this agency is a big job. It is an important job, and I consider it to be my job to do everything I can to make sure whoever fills it is truly committed to putting students and families first. So, Ms. DeVos, I am looking forward to hearing your answers to some questions, since I have a number of very serious concerns that need to be addressed. First, I'm going to want to learn more about your extensive financial entanglements and potential conflicts of interest. As a billionaire with hundreds, if not thousands, of investments made through complex financial instruments, many of which are made in ways that are not transparent and very hard to track, you need to make it very clear how you will be avoiding conflicts of interest should you be confirmed. That goes for your investments as well as the massive web of investments made by your immediate family. Despite starting off on the wrong track by not having an ethics letter complete before this hearing today, I appreciate what you are doing to provide this committee the information to understand how you intend to live up to the highest level of ethics and transparency. So far, you have not accepted calls to release 3 years of tax returns, but I'm hoping you reconsider that approach and that you are cooperating fully with the Office of Government Ethics. Second, I have major concerns with how you spent your career and fortune fighting to privatize public education and gut investments in public schools. I'll have some specific questions about how the privatization policies you have pushed have impacted students and how you intend to use the public trust and taxpayer dollars to support public education and not continue to undermine schools and teachers from inside the department as you have as an advocate from the outside. I will want to know more about the large contributions you've made to groups that are ideologically opposed to workers, including teachers, and that want to impose anti-LGBT or anti-women's health beliefs on public schools and the students in them. I will want to make sure you publicly commit to implementing our Every Student Succeeds Act by upholding the strong federal guardrails that are in that law. And I will want to know how you plan to tackle the persistent achievement gap. Third, while you have been outspoken on K-12 issues, your record and positions are not clear in a number of critical areas. So I want to learn more about how you plan to approach higher education and whether or not we can count on you to stand with students and borrowers. I'm very interested in your thoughts on Title IX and how we can do everything possible to stop the scourge of campus sexual assault. I was not happy with how you talked about this issue when we met. I'm hopeful that you have learned more about it since then and are prepared to address it seriously. I'm going to want to know how your personal religious and ideological views on women's health and safety would impact how you'd approach this issue in the department. And I'm very concerned with what has been reported in the press about your views on the importance of the Office of Civil Rights, which works to ensure students with disabilities, LGBTQ students, religious minorities, women and girls, students of color, and all of our students are treated with dignity and respect. And I'm going to want to know more about how you will enforce critical civil rights laws. And as all of my colleagues here know, I have a particular passion for early learning. And I want to hear where you stand and how the federal government can help ensure that every child is prepared for success in kindergarten. Those are just a few of the issues, so I am looking forward to a robust dialogue tonight. I'm hoping you're transparent about your views, open about your record and the impact it has had on students, and willing to make some straightforward commitments regarding the core responsibilities of this department and the role you hope to take in it. I will be asking you to commit to providing this committee with additional information and responses to all reasonable follow-up questions as quickly as possible. I'm hopeful that this can be a smooth process, but Mr. Chairman, I know my members are all here tonight. They are hoping for more than just 5 minutes of question on this critical nominee, and I hope that as we get through this, you will consider doing that.
Well, thank you, Senator Murray. I'm going to follow the golden rule. I'm not going to change the rules and apply to Mrs. DeVos rules that we haven't applied to President Obama's nominees or to President Bush's nominees. So we'll have a 5-minute round of questions, and you and I can ask questions after that for another 5 minutes. That's exactly what we've done before. Members of this committee have met with Mrs. DeVos. Some have already asked written questions. We'll have 2 days to think of more, and then she'll need to answer them before we vote. As far as tax returns are concerned, if you would like to bring that up, we can bring that up at our next executive session, which would be the 24th, if her government ethics letter is completed by Friday. I would note committee rules don't require tax returns to be reported by presidential nominees. The law does not. We did not require it of President Obama's 2 nominees for Education Secretary. If we want to change the rules, we can do that, but I'm not in favor of changing the rules in the middle of the process.
Mr. Chairman, may I ask
So-
a point of order?
What is your point of order?
I believe, Mr. Chairman, that we got a second round with the John King hearings. I asked 2 rounds of questions in that case.
You did and I did, and so we, in each of the John King, in the last 2 nominees, Mr. Duncan and Mr. King, we had a 5-minute round, and then the chairman and one other senator, asked 5 minutes of questions. So I will
Mr. Chairman,
I will ask 5 minutes of questions, and I will give to Senator Murray the opportunity to be the other senator who does that.
Well, Mr. Chairman, I would just say that nobody asked for additional time at that point. So I hope that as we get through this hearing, we hear members' questions, we'll have an opportunity to revisit.
Well, I appreciate the request, but I'm not going to change the rules in the middle of the game.
I was not aware those were rules.
That is the precedent that we followed as far back in 1991 when I was the Education Secretary. We did it for both of President Obama's, and we're going to do the same thing for
Well,
Mrs.
again,
DeVos.
I wasn't aware that there was a precedent, but I would like to,
That's as clear a precedent as I can think of.
well, Mr. Chairman, I would also like to have 36 letters signed by 133 organizations expressing concern or opposition to this nomination to be placed in the record.
They will be. We welcome the nominee, Ms. DeVos, to the hearing, and we welcome your husband and your daughters, your son, your daughter-in-law, and your son-in-law, and we welcome all of our other guests here. Mrs. DeVos will be introduced first, as I said, by Senator Tim Scott, a member of this committee, a strong champion for education. Then she'll be introduced by Senator Joe Lieberman, who served here for 24 years, representing Connecticut until he retired in January 2013. Thank you both for joining us. I've already said what I have to say about Mrs. DeVos. I think she'll be an excellent Secretary of Education, so I think we should move ahead with Senator Scott's introduction. You may then turn it over to Senator Lieberman. Then we'll hear from Mrs. DeVos, and then we'll begin our questions. Senator Scott.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I will note that I am surprised at the number of folks, photographers, who've showed up to hear Senator Lieberman's introduction. So very well done, Senator Lieberman. I've known the DeVos family for about 3 decades. I started learning how to sell when I was in college, and it was a part of one of the DeVos companies that I learned how to sell. So I'm very thankful that a champion of public education, a champion of education, and specifically a champion of education for poor kids sits to my left. I will recall my own upbringing as a poor kid who, by the time I was in the 4th grade, attended 4 different schools. It's really important for us to recognize the powerful impact that education has specifically on poor kids. So I am excited about this transition, looking forward to the opportunity to have Betsy DeVos as our champion for all children, for all education, but specifically for what I consider high potential kids, others call at-risk kids. For the last 28 years, Ms. DeVos has been a champion for those kids. A lifelong resident of Michigan, she attended Calvin College in Grand Rapids, Michigan. Mrs. DeVos is a businesswoman and an entrepreneur. She is the chairman of the American Federation for Children and the WinQuest Group. For those of you who may not know Betsy, she had a humble beginning. Her parents mortgaged everything they had to start a small auto parts business. She still remembers when she was 7 years old, helping her father paint a cinder block building that became the office and the first manufacturing location. I believe the color was steel blue. During the summer months when she was in college, Betsy worked the 3rd shift at her family's business. She understands the sacrifices that families have to make in order to build a better life for themselves and for their children. She has successfully advocated for expansion of education opportunity in dozens and dozens of states. She also helped her husband launch a charter school in Grand Rapids, Michigan, which is now one of the highest performing charter schools in her home state. I've been to that school way before there was any idea that she might one day sit here before this committee, way before we ever assumed that there would be a Trump candidacy. Several years ago, I visited the Aviation High School and had a chance to sit at lunch and talk with the kids, understand and appreciate their hunger for education was stirred by the DeVos family, stirred by the DeVos family's commitment to public education at this charter high school. She is motivated by making sure students go to safe and high-performing schools, whether they are public, private, charter, traditional, or non-traditional schools. She understands the need to focus on accountability, not just to have a system in place, but to actually hold schools accountable for the results they have. What she supports is holding all schools accountable, whether they are traditional public schools or charter schools. Bless you. Mrs. DeVos is clearly not opposed to accountability. What she is opposed to is holding some schools accountable, but not all schools. What she is opposed to is leaving children trapped in schools that we know are failing the very students that will have no hope if they do not receive a high-quality education. Bless you. Only one more left. Parents and students could not ask for a better role model or a more thoughtful leader to move the education system into the 21st century. Betsy cares. She questions. She considers. And then and only then will she act. These are the traits of a leader and a doer. I look forward to supporting her nomination throughout the next few weeks. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Scott. Senator Lieberman, welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Senator Murray, members of the committee, and a special hello to Chris Murphy, my friend and successor from Connecticut. It's great to be back in the Senate today to introduce Betsy DeVos for your consideration as the next Secretary of Education. I met Betsy several years ago in one of the many bipartisan efforts to improve the quality of education of America's children that she and so many others of you have been involved in. When I left the Senate as a way to continue my own work on education reform, I became a member of the board of the American Federation for Children, the nonprofit organization that Betsy DeVos founded to provide better education options for lower-income children throughout America. I'm very proud of what the AFC has achieved, particularly at the state level. More than 400,000 lower-income families have been empowered with financial support to take their children out of schools where they thought the kids were not getting an adequate education and put them into schools that they thought were better. For me, as a Democrat, it is especially gratifying that many of these AFC state programs have been enacted with bipartisan support in state legislatures. None of the progress which the AFC has achieved very specifically for those 400,000 plus kids would have occurred without Betsy's leadership, which is inclusive and motivating. She is disciplined, organized, knows how to set goals, and then develop practical plans to achieve them. She is really a purpose-driven team builder, and I've seen that in my membership on the board of the AFC. Now, I understand that the Department of Education is bigger than anything she, or for that matter, most any of us, except for Senator Alexander, of course, has ever led. But everything I have seen tells me that Betsy is ready to take on this assignment and do it very well. I know that some people are questioning her qualifications to be Secretary of Education, and too many of those questions to me seem to be based on the fact that she doesn't come from within the education establishment. But honestly, I believe that today that's one of the most important qualifications you could have for this job. And she has many others. She's a mother and a grandmother. She cares about children more generally and has been involved in education like so many parents and local citizen school board members across America for almost 30 years. Her involvement has not just been as a philanthropist and advocate for reform, though she has been a real leader in both. She also mentors students in the public schools of Grand Rapids, Michigan. And here's another important qualification I think Betsy has for this job. She will ask the right questions, such as, is this federal education program working? Is it giving our kids the education they need to live productive and satisfying lives? If not, how can we improve it? An examination of the facts of the state of American education today makes clear that although current federal education programs are working for many of our children, they are failing millions of others. And here are just a few of the salient and, to me, troubling facts. Among all students of all income groups, less than 40% of high school graduates are college or career ready, according to the ACT. A recent report said that only 35% of 8th graders were proficient on the NAEP reading exam and only 34% on the math exam. In other words, about 2/3 of 8th graders in our country are not proficient in reading and math. Proficient is the middle, as the members of the committee know, middle ranking under the NAEP. Among lower income students, the weight of these shortcomings in the educational status quo falls disproportionately heavily. There are too many ways to illustrate this, but let me just give this one example. There are more than 1,200 high schools in America who have more than 1.1 million students that fail to graduate from high school at least 1/3 of their students. Some, as many as more than half the students, don't make it to high school graduation. And these schools primarily educate low-income students and students of color. These low graduation rate high schools are located in both urban and rural areas, and they're in almost every state. New York has 199 of them, Georgia 115, California 105, and Alabama and Mississippi each more than 50. These are jarring numbers, and I think they cry out for national education reform. We're just not keeping our founders' promise of equal opportunity. We're not preparing the next generation of Americans to enable our economy to compete successfully in the world. We just can't accept the status quo in education anymore. We need a change agent and an education reformer to be education secretary. A leader who has one big goal, which is to give every child in America, regardless of family income or zip code, a first-class education. And that is exactly the kind of education secretary I believe Betsy DeVos can and will be. Now, because Betsy has been fighting for reform and disrupting the status quo for so long, her nomination is naturally controversial. After all, she has directly challenged the education establishment by supporting charter schools and other school choice programs. But I can tell you that in all my work with her, I have never heard Betsy speak against our public school system. I have heard her ask what we can do for the low-income kids who are trapped in bad public schools until we can make more of our public schools as good as they should be. Is it fair to stand back and not help the parents who want better for their children but can't get it just because they can't afford it? Is it acceptable to have so many children from all income groups graduate from our high schools unprepared for college and the high-tech economy they will enter?
No, you're right.
No, it is not. And that's why, Mr. Chairman, Senator Murray, members of the committee, I hope you'll confirm Betsy DeVos' nomination to be Secretary of Education. I think it's in our national interest to give her a chance to change the status quo in our schools and secure a better future for our country and for all of our children. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Senator Lieberman. Thank you for coming back. Before I introduce or welcome Mrs. DeVos, I'd like to enter into the record 97 letters of support for Mrs. DeVos for Education Secretary from a variety of school groups, former education secretaries, governors, business groups, and others. Mrs. DeVos.
Thank you, Chairman. Chairman Alexander, Ranking Member Murray, Senators, thank you for the opportunity to be with you this afternoon. Thank you, Senators Scott and Lieberman, for those very kind words of introduction. I honor and applaud your lifelong dedication to the success of our nation's students and your fine public service. I want to begin by thanking my family for their support, many of them seated behind me here, except for my 5 grandchildren, the oldest of which is 5, so it was not advisable that they join us today. But I am very honored that President-elect Trump has asked me to join his team, and I'm grateful for his dedication to education. If confirmed, I look forward to working with him, Vice President-elect Pence, and all of you to bring educational opportunity to every family in this great nation. While we may have differences, I think we can all agree that learning as a lifelong pursuit is a fundamental American virtue. We are blessed beyond measure with educators who pour themselves into students. The schools in which they work are as diverse as the students they educate. In fact, all of us here and our children have attended a mix of traditional, publicly funded, and private schools. This is a reflection of the diversity that is today's public education. Growing up in Holland, Michigan, I attended local Christian schools and then Calvin College. My greatest educational influence in life was a public school teacher named Elsa Prince. While her students called her Mrs. Prince, to this day, I just call her Mom. When Dick and I became parents, education took on a whole new meaning. We recognized that other parents were not able to make similar decisions about their children's education based on their income or the zip code in which they lived. When our oldest reached school age, we visited the Potter's House, a Christian school which serves many low-income families in my hometown. We saw the struggles and sacrifices many of these families faced when trying to choose the best educational option for their children. For me, this was not just an issue of public policy, but of national injustice. I committed to do something about it, and it's become my life's work. I applaud the great work of the Potter's House and its co-founder, John Boy, who is here with us today. He and his team of teachers are doing a great job. But here's the sad reality. In the past 28 years, the need and demand for these other options have grown unabated. I share President-elect Trump's view that it's time to shift the debate from what the system thinks is best for kids to what moms and dads want, expect, and deserve. Parents no longer believe that a one-size-fits-all model of learning meets the need of every child, and they know other options exist, whether magnet, virtual, charter, home, faith-based, or any other combination. Yet too many parents are denied access to the full range of options, choices that many of us here in this room have exercised for our own children. Why in 2017 are we still questioning parents' ability to exercise educational choice for their children? I'm a firm believer that parents should be empowered to choose the learning environment that's best for each of their individual children. The vast majority of students in this country will continue to attend public schools. If confirmed, I will be a strong advocate for great public schools. But if a school is troubled or unsafe or not a good fit for a child, perhaps they have a special need that's going unmet, we should support a parent's right to enroll their child in a high-quality alternative. It's really pretty simple. Every child in America deserves to be in a safe environment that's free from discrimination. Every student in America dreams of developing his or her unique talents and gifts. Every parent in America dreams of a future when their children have access to schools with the rigor, challenges, and safe environments that successfully prepare them for a brighter, more hopeful tomorrow. And every teacher in America dreams of breaking free from standardization so that they can deploy their unique creativity and innovate with their students. Our nation's schools are filled with talented, devoted professionals who successfully meet the needs of many, many children. But even our best schools don't work for all. This isn't the fault of teachers, but a reality that all students are unique, learn differently, and excel at their own pace. Students also face new challenges today. In particular, our high school graduates are having increasing difficulty accessing affordable higher education. Escalating tuition is pricing aspiring and talented students out of college. Others are burdened with debts that will take years or even decades to pay off. There is no magic wand to make the debt go away, but we do need to take action. It would be a mistake to shift that burden to struggling taxpayers without first addressing why tuition has gotten so high. For starters, we need to embrace new pathways of learning. For too long, a college degree has been pushed as the only avenue for a better life. The old and expensive brick, mortar, and ivy model is not the only one that will lead to a prosperous future. Craftsmanship is not a fallback, but a noble pursuit. Students should make informed choices about what type of education they want to pursue post-high school and have access to high-quality options. President-elect Trump and I agree we need to support all post-secondary avenues, including trade and vocational schools and community colleges. Of course, on every one of these issues, Congress will play a vital role. If confirmed, I look forward to working with you to enact solutions that empower parents and students, provide high-quality options, and spend tax dollars wisely. We will work together to ensure the Every Student Succeeds Act is implemented as Congress intended, with local communities freed from burdensome regulations from Washington. And I look forward to working with Congress and all stakeholders to reauthorize the Higher Education Act to meet the needs of today's college students. President-elect Trump and I know it won't be Washington, D.C. that unlocks our nation's potential, nor a bigger bureaucracy, tougher mandates, or a federal agency. The answer is local control and listening to parents, students, and teachers. For nearly 3 decades, I've been involved in education as a volunteer, an advocate for children, and a voice for parents. I've worked as an in-school mentor for students in the Grand Rapids Public Schools and have had the privilege of interacting with students and their families and teachers in ways that have changed my life and my perspective about education forever. I've worked with governors, legislators, and business and community leaders to expand educational opportunity through options that are making a lifetime of difference for hundreds of thousands of kids this year alone. And I've worked with many dedicated teachers who strive every day to help students achieve, fulfill their potential, and prepare them for the global challenges they will face. For me, it's simple. I trust parents, and I believe in our children. Thank you again for the opportunity to appear before you. I look forward to answering your questions.
Thank you, Mrs. DeVos. We'll now begin our round of 5-minute questions. I'm going to defer my questions until later, so we'll begin with Senator Enzi and then to Senator Murray.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Mrs. DeVos. I want to welcome you here and thank you for being willing to take on this kind of a project and to appear before us. I enjoyed our meeting last month and look forward to working with you as we consider your nomination, and then after that. You're going to be dealing with a great variety of states, from high population to low population. I happen to come from the lowest population state. It has some special challenges in education, call it rural and frontier challenges. We don't allow a child to travel by more than an hour by bus to or from school. And as a result, we have some schools that have 1 or 2 students. It's a little different situation than was even envisioned with No Child Left Behind, so I'm glad that we've changed to ESSA. The federal government, there was a Quality Counts 2017 report, and I'm pleased that Wyoming was ranked number 7 out of the 50 states in that, and in the area of financing education, we were number 1. And that comes at a time when our state's going through some economical suffering because of the Obama administration's war on coal and fossil fuels and the hardworking families that support those industries. But rural and frontier has some special problems. Part of them are that the submission of some of the applications and some of the applicable reports have no bearing on what we're doing. And that's important when we have the rural aspect as well as the Wind River Indian Reservation, which has the home of 2 tribes. And Every Student Succeeds, there are provisions to permit the Secretary to reduce the department's workforce. With the return of educational authority to the states and the elimination of federal programs, it's important that that workforce be reduced to ensure more educational funding is provided to the schools and not kept in Washington. Also, I'm troubled by the Government Accountability Office report that was issued at my request last November that showed the cost projections for the income-driven college loan repayment program are tens of billions dollars higher than the original estimates. And those estimates were based on data and accounting methods that were deeply flawed. You'll inherit that, and the current Department of Education's data lacked transparency, omitted key information, and made other flawed assumptions. As an accountant, I was appalled. Then there's the career and technical education that you mentioned. I appreciate your emphasis on the value of craftsmanship and also technology. I just saw the movie Hidden Figures that introduced people to computers and the value of women in the workplace in NASA to get them into space. I have 1/6 of my schools that don't participate in Perkins Career Technical Education funding because the low population gives them such a low amount of funding that it isn't worth doing it, and that needs to change. So, Mrs. DeVos, one of the most important jobs you'll have is in the implementation of Every Student Succeeds Act. I'm pleased with what you said about it. Can you talk about your plans to engage rural and frontier states and communities in that process?
Well, Senator, thank you. Thank you for that question, and I too enjoyed our meeting in your office. I particularly enjoyed hearing a little bit about the special needs of schools like the Wapiti School that has the grizzly bear fence surrounding it. I think that is a unique need to Wyoming, certainly. But certainly rural schools and rural settings require different approaches and different options. And so I refer to the Every Student Succeeds Act, and I think the implementation of that and the Wyoming's plan for that will be particularly important to recognize the unique needs of the rural population that you have, as will many of the other states represented here in the committee. And when we think about the future, I think about the opportunity for more choices and options for those parents at a distance learning type of a situation. and the possibility that course choices or online courses could be offered in ways that they may not have been previously. And I would, if confirmed, look forward to working with you and some of your other colleagues that face those same types of challenges, such as Senator Collins and Senator Murkowski, and work with you to address the specific needs of rural communities and high rural population states.
Thank you. Look forward to working with you.
Thank you, Senator. Thank you, Senator Enzi. Senator Murray.
Mr. Chairman, it's your committee. If you want to go first.
No, I'm going, thank you for the courtesy. I'm going to go a little later. Thank you.
Okay. Ms. DeVos, I really am troubled by some of the comments and things you said about public education and how you see the role of the department you've been nominated to lead now. And so my first question for you really is yes or no. That's all I want is a yes or no. Do you believe that the mission of the Department of Education should be to strengthen public education for all of our students?
Yes, I do.
Good. So can you commit to us tonight that you will not work to privatize public schools or cut a single penny from public education?
Senator, thanks for that question. I look forward, if confirmed, to working with you to talk about how we address the needs of all parents and all students. And we acknowledge today that not all schools are working for the students that are assigned to them. And I'm hopeful that we can work together to find common ground in ways that we can solve those issues and empower parents to make choices on behalf of their children that are right for them.
I take that as not being willing to commit to not privatizing public schools or cutting money from education.
Well, I guess I wouldn't characterize it in that way.
Well, okay. Let me ask you about conflict of interest. President-elect Trump thinks he can resolve his financial conflicts by having his family manage his interests while he's in office. Do you think it's okay for family members to profit off of companies that are directly impacted by the decisions you will make if confirmed? And yes or no?
No, I do
Good.
not.
Well, we do know that from press reports, you and your family have invested in what you call the education industry. That includes investments in SoFi, which is a student loan refinancing company, and K-12 Inc., which is a chain of for-profit online charter schools. You told this committee that you would sever ties with your family businesses if confirmed, but you also said you intend to return to these businesses owned by your family when you leave public service. So how is that different from President-elect Trump's arrangement?
Well, Senator, first of all, let me be very clear about any conflicts. Where conflicts are identified, they will be resolved. I will not be conflicted, period. I commit that to you all. And with respect to the specific ones that you cited, one of them we were aware of as we entered the process, and that is in the process of being divested. Where if there are any others that are identified, they will be appropriately divested as well.
So from your answer, I assume that you and your family intend to forego all investments in education companies from now on.
Anything that is deemed to be a conflict will not be a part of our investing.
Okay. How do you intend to convince this committee that no entity will feel pressure to purchase, partner, or contract with corporate or nonprofit entities you and your family invested in should you be confirmed as secretary?
I can commit to you that nobody will feel any pressure like that.
Well, as you know, this committee has not received your required paperwork from the Office of Government Ethics, and they have told me they cannot provide me assurance right now that your conflicts of interest have been identified and resolved by the office. So again, will you be providing this committee with 3 years of tax returns that we've requested?
Senator, I have provided the committee with everything that's been requested and required of the committee, and I'm frankly very proud of the team that's been working very hard on my behalf to get all of this together. And I know that the OGE is working very hard to work through my and others' confirmation processes as well, as is the department. I'm very hopeful that we will get this resolved and to a point of resolution here very soon.
Since we do not have your ethics paperwork tonight, we've not had a chance to look at it, we've not had a chance to know whether we have additional questions, would you commit to coming back before this committee once we have that from the OGE so we can ask additional questions?
I commit to making sure we have an ethics agreement resolved and reached.
Well, I hope that we have a chance, Mr. Chairman, if we have questions, to be able to follow up on that. I just have a few seconds left. You have vast wealth, obviously, and you have used it, as you have said yourself, to influence the political system and elect candidates who support your ideological agenda. If you are confirmed, I want to know if you believe it's appropriate for you and your family to continue to use its wealth to pressure state, local, and federal candidates to support your agenda.
Senator, if I am confirmed, as you know, I will not be involved and engaged in political contributions, and my husband will not be either.
Okay, thank you very much. I appreciate that.
Thank you, Senator Murray. Senator Burr is deferred to Senator Isaacson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. DeVos, for your commitment to your state, your commitment to education, and for being here today, and congratulations on your nomination. I have a statement, and I'd like to ask you 3 questions in regard to that statement. This committee established a task force on government regulation and identified 59 specific burdensome regulations that engage public education, primarily higher education. Of the 59 recommendations, 12 are totally at the auspices of the Secretary of Education. They can be invalidated and changed immediately. In 2015, Senators Bennett, King, Booker, Burr, Alexander, and myself introduced a bill to drastically simplify the burdensome and aggravating application process families fill out for federal financial aid, known as FAFSA. The University of Georgia, Emory University, and Georgia Tech, 3 well-known institutions in my state, have all said this is a priority for them to move forward and simplify the process of teaching, getting our kids the best education they can get. My question is, would you commit to working with our office to advance the recommendations of the task force on higher education?
Senator, thanks for that question. I'm aware of this task force report, and it sounds like the direction that it's taken is very promising. And if confirmed, I look forward to working with you and the others who have been working on this to implement the things that are deemed appropriate to be done.
Will you work with us and commit to us that you'll work with us to implement those items identified by the task force that the Secretary herself or himself currently has the authority to change? Meaning this won't be another government report that goes on the shelf, but one that will be acted on one way or another.
You have my commitment on that, Senator.
And lastly, will you work with this committee to simplify the application for federal financial aid known as FAFSA to reduce the burden of aggravation for families to take on, easier for students to apply to college and to attend college?
Indeed, I will. I know that's been a very burdensome process and application. In fact, I recall Chairman Alexander's actually unfolding the entire length of it. It's a very long process, and I would look forward to working with you to
104 questions. If I remember correctly, Mr. Chairman, 104 questions. The committee came up with a 2-page, 4-question application that worked just as well, so it's an important way to improve attending college and getting financing done.
Well, and let me just say, I don't think we should make it any more difficult than absolutely necessary for students to be able to further their education.
Right answer. Is Mr. Boyd here? You referred to the Potter's House.
He is indeed.
Mr. Boyd, would
Boyd's
you
right
stand
here.
up? Could you stand up, please? I just want to thank you for what you've done to show the kind of leadership we need to help people who otherwise don't get any help, aren't getting any help, and may be discarded through life's disposal. You've done a great job with Potter's House. We have a number of Georgia investments in Potter's House. Appreciate what you've done very much. Thank you. Thank you. And that brings me to this point. Ms. Murray, Senator Murray, was talking about privatizing schools and talking about the importance of the lack of importance of charter schools and the importance of protecting public education. And she talked about her goal and my goal, which we've shared with each other, and that is to work towards preparing 4-year-old pre-kindergarten for every student in the country, because we think it's so important for the early learning years for kids to get access. We did it in Georgia. And how we did it in Georgia was taking faith-based educational 4-year-old pre-kindergarten programs and private 4-year-old pre-kindergarten programs and private institutions to provide us with the classrooms and the teachers to teach the curriculum in the new program. And today in Georgia, 61,000 4-year-old kids go to 4-year-old pre-kindergarten paid for by the state that is delivered by a variety of private and public institutions and entities. My point is, if you're going to meet the challenges of public education today and have to depend solely on the resources that are available to it, you'll never get where you want to go. But if you get the private sector making an investment in public education and have seamless standards that everybody commits to, you can greatly expand the opportunity of education, greatly expand accessibility to education, and do it through using faith-based, private, and other type institutions. Would you agree with that?
I think it's a very interesting approach in Georgia, that Georgia has taken, and I think it's very similar to what Florida has done as well. And as the ESSA Act is implemented, I think it will be really interesting for states to take a look at some other successful programs. And I would also look forward to working with the other agencies that are involved with some of the preschool funding of Head Start and so forth, HHS, and see if there's ways to more effectively use those monies to help kids be ready for kindergarten when they reach kindergarten.
Well, my time is up, but I just want to acknowledge, in reading your testimony and talking to you in my office, I appreciate your recognition that the non-traditional student of 25 years ago has become the traditional student of today. Not every kid lives in a two-parent household. Not every kid lives in an academic and encouraged environment. We have to come up with the programs necessary to train our kids to be able to do the jobs of the 21st century in different ways all the time. Congratulations on your nomination. I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Isaacson. Senator Sanders.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and Mrs. DeVos, thanks for being with us, and thanks for dropping into the office a few days ago.
Thank you, Senator.
Mrs. DeVos, there is a growing fear, I think, in this country that we are moving toward what some would call an oligarchic form of society, where a small number of very, very wealthy billionaires control, to a significant degree, our economic and political life. Would you be so kind as to tell us how much money your family has contributed to the Republican Party over the years?
Senator, first of all, thank you for that question. Again, was pleased to meet you in your office last week. I wish I could give you that number. I don't know.
I have heard the number was $200 million. Does that sound in the ballpark?
Collectively, between
over
my
the years,
entire
yes.
family, that's possible.
Okay. My question is, and I don't mean to be rude, but do you think if you were not a multi-billionaire, if your family has not made hundreds of millions of dollars of contributions to the Republican Party, that you would be sitting here today?
Senator, as a matter of fact, I do think that there would be that possibility. I've worked very hard on behalf of parents and children for the last almost 30 years to be a voice for parents and to voice for students and to empower parents to make decisions on behalf of their children, primarily low-income children.
Thank you. In your statement, your prepared statement, you say, and I quote, "Students should make informed choices about what type of education they want to pursue post-high school and have access to high-quality options." Some of us believe that we should make public colleges and universities tuition-free so that every young person in this country, regardless of income, does have that option. That's not the case today. Will you work with me and others to make public colleges and universities tuition-free through federal and state efforts?
Well, Senator, I think that's a really interesting idea, and it's really great to consider and think about. But I think we also have to consider the fact that there's nothing in life that's truly free. Somebody's going to pay for it, and so...
Yes, you're right.
And
You're right.
so
Somebody
I would-
will pay for it, but that takes us to another issue.
I think
And
if-
that is, if I may.
Yeah.
And that is, right now, we have proposals in front of us to substantially lower tax breaks for billionaires in this country, while at the same time, low-income kids can't afford to go to college. Do you think that makes sense?
Senator, I think if your question is really around how can we help college and higher education be more affordable for young people as they anticipate
Actually, that wasn't my question. My question is, should we make public colleges and universities tuition-free so that every family in America, regardless of income, will have the ability to have their kids get a higher education? That was my question.
Senator, I think we can work together, and we could work hard on making sure that college or higher education in some form is affordable for all young people that want to pursue it. And I would look forward to that opportunity if confirmed.
Would you agree with me that if there is a mom watching this hearing who makes $30,000, $40,000 a year, single mom perhaps, who has to pay $10,000 or $15,000 a year for childcare for her daughter, that is a burden that is almost impossible to deal with? What are your proposals about making childcare universal for our working families. Do you have ideas on that? Do you agree with that idea?
That certainly is a burden, and I can understand the challenge that family, that young mother would face in deciding how to best serve her child's needs. Again, I think if we're talking about the future of that child and their education, I would look forward to working with you. I know we have common ground on a lot of things, and we could find ways to work together to ensure that that young mom's child will have a great opportunity for a great education in the future.
There are countries around the world which do provide universal, very inexpensive or free child care. Would you work with me in moving our government in that direction?
Senator, again, I feel very strongly about the importance of young families having an opportunity for good child care for their children. I'm not sure that
But it's
that's
not a
part of
question
the
of an
education
opportunity.
department.
It's a question of being able, very often my Republican friends talk about opportunity. But it's not a question of opportunity. It's a question of being able to afford it. How do we help somebody who's making $8 or $9 an hour at a time when we can't raise the minimum wage here because of Republican opposition? How do we make sure that those moms can get quality child care that they can afford?
Well, I would look forward to helping that mom get a quality education for their child or their children so that they could look forward to a bright and hopeful future.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Senator Sanders. We're going next to Senator Hatch.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We're certainly happy to have you here, Mr. Voss, and I appreciate the abilities that you've exemplified, the eleemosynary work of your family, the care that you have for education, the hard work that you've done. I have to say, there are very few people in this country could even come close to what you've done. Let me just say I welcome you to the committee. It's a pleasure to be here today to consider your nomination to serve as Secretary of Education. I appreciate your commitment to expanding opportunities for all children and your tireless work in the field of education. Your record of service is in line with Utah values, especially your commitment to restoring local autonomy over schools. Those closest to students know what is best for their education. A truth you have championed as a reformer. This committee's support and passage of the Every Student Succeeds Act illustrates that these values are not unique to you and me, but are instead shared by many of my colleagues who care for education as a reality. All I can say is many of my colleagues' selections for this position have worked very hard to try and make sure that good people serve in these positions, not just people with stereotypical education, but those who might bring really new things to the forefront. And I hope, all I can say is that we've helped many of our colleagues we've ushered them through this process on both sides of the floor, and I hope my colleagues will extend the same courtesy to you. I also believe in extending presidential selections the benefit of the doubt, recognizing, for example, that a person's views as a private citizen do not necessarily reflect their future actions as a holder of public office. From my private conversations with you, I trust that you will not force particular policies on states, unlike what some in education do. Your predecessors have done in some cases in violation of congressional intent. I also recognize that support for parental choice for all students is not an attack on public education. My children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren have attended public education as a reality, and I have to say that they've attended these schools, and I believe that you share my commitment to ensuring that every child receives a quality education, regardless of the type of school they attend. Now, I've spent my entire service here fighting to make equity in education a reality. And I believe that you will be an indispensable partner in this fight. And I look forward to working with you on the priorities that are important to the people of Utah, including increasing transparency, accountability, and access to higher education, as well as increasing innovation and evidence-based reforms. Unlike others here who may be interested in attacking your donations, I know you want to do right by all children, so I will stick to focusing on how we can work together on sound policy. Now, right now, the Department of Education does not have a uniform measure for describing whether borrowers are repaying their loans. According to the confusion, the department is using a different borrower repayment rate methodology for each policy it comes up with. The uniform metric might prove helpful in making information available to Congress, the higher education community, and the public about the success of former students in repaying their federal student loan debts. Now, this information could also tell us the extent to which student loan repayment rates vary across institutions. I believe students should have access to a wide variety of data when choosing a school, just like they would when choosing a car. Greater access to information would lead to wise decision-making when choosing an institution. Now, do you support increasing transparency and transparency regarding loan results for students and parents to use when deciding upon a post-secondary school?
Senator, thank you. Thank you for that question and for your kind comments. I agree with you 100% that the issue of student debt and the amount of student debt, over $1.3 trillion right now, up almost 1,000% in the last 8 years. It's a very serious issue, and one which we all have to, I think, pay a very close attention to and resolve in some way. And if confirmed, I certainly will look forward to working with you and your colleagues on ways to get after this issue, the issue of the cost of education as well as debt repayment kind of go hand in hand, and I will look forward to working with you and your colleagues should I be confirmed.
Well, thank you so much. I hope you'll be confirmed, and I think you'll make a great secretary.
Thank you, Senator Hatch. Senator Casey.
Mr. Chairman, thank you very much. Put me on record as asking for a second round as well. I know that's under consideration. Ms. DeVos, thank you.
It's not under consideration, but I'll be glad to put you on record.
We'll keep trying. Ms. DeVos, thank you for being here, and appreciate you and your family being with us tonight. I wanted to start with a basic question. Would you agree with me that the problem, and that's an understatement in my judgment, but the problem of sexual assault on college campuses is a significant problem that we should take action on?
Senator, thank you for that question. I agree with you that sexual assault in any form or in any place is a problem, and no disagreement there.
The second question is, would you uphold, let me give you a little background here that you might know. In 2011, the Department of Education issued guidance on Title IX by this administration, the current administration. I'd ask you, would you uphold that 2011 Title IX guidance as it relates to sexual assault on campus?
Well, Senator, I know that there's a lot of conflicting ideas and opinions around that guidance, and if confirmed, I would look forward to working with you and your colleagues and understand the range of opinions and understand the issues from the higher ed institutions that are charged with resolving these and addressing them, and I would look forward to working together to find some resolutions.
Well, I agree with the guidance, so I'm just asking for a yes or no. I guess you're not going to give me a yes or no answer on committing to upholding that guidance.
It would be premature for me to do that today.
This problem is, to say it's an epidemic, I think, is also an understatement. The Centers for Disease Control told us back in 2009 that 1 in 5 women are the victims of sexual assault on campus, and yet a lot of those women who were in that 1 in 5 never have an opportunity or never report incidents. So it's a major problem for women. In so many ways, it's the ultimate betrayal. Parents for generations have told their daughters, study hard in school, get good grades, because when you get good grades, you might have an opportunity to go to college. And if you go to college, the world is open to you, and you can succeed by having higher education. But too often, and it happens every year on many campuses around the country, too often a young woman is a victim, sometimes in the first day she's there, or the first week, and sometimes over the course of her first year. And her life is destroyed by that. So we have a long way to go to addressing this problem. We took some good action on this issue as part of the Violence Against Women Act. It just happened to be my bill that got passed into law, the so-called Campus Save Act. What we did in that bill was, for the first time, say to colleges and universities, you have to do more than you're doing, certainly on one broad topic of prevention and on awareness. So young men on the campus who are the perpetrators of this have to be part of the solution. They have to be part of bystander education, a preventative strategy. But in addition to all kinds of transparency and requirements, this is what the Act did for women, or for victims, I should say, or victims of assault. Colleges and universities must provide clear statements regarding the procedures followed. They must do more than they had been doing when it comes to enforcement. And in particular, with regard to victims, it says the college or university must indicate to the victim her right to notify law enforcement, should the victim choose to, that the obligation, the institution has an obligation to help the victim report the incident to law enforcement, including helping her get a protective order, among other things that the school has to do. So that's what the law is now, based upon my bill. The fall of 2015, this went into effect across the country. There's an organization called the Foundation for Individual Rights in Education. They support a bill that would totally change that. They would force a victim to go to police departments to report, and they would change the standard of evidence. Would you commit, as Secretary of Education, to retaining the standard of evidence that is currently the law?
Well, Senator, let me just say my mom's heart is really piqued on this issue. Assault in any form is never okay, and I just want to be very clear on that. And so, if confirmed, I look forward to understanding the past actions and the current situation better, and to ensuring that the intent of the law is actually carried out in a way that that recognizes both the victim, the rights of the victims, as well as those who are accused as well, and that the
I'm out of time, but let me just, the organization that has that position, which is contrary to the law, current law, and contrary to the spirit of what we try to do in that piece of legislation, is a recipient of donations from you totaling about $25,000 over 4 years. I hope that's not a conflict of interest, but I would hope that you would make a definitive commitment as the nominee to enforce the law as it relates to sexual assault on college campuses. And I'll send you more questions about it.
Thank you, Senator.
Thank you, Senator Casey. Senator Paul.
Congratulations, Mr. Voss, and thanks for your testimony. I grew up and went to public schools and got a great education, and big fan of public schools. My kids have gone to public schools, but there are also some public schools that aren't doing very well. You know, even the Department of Education says about half of them aren't doing very well, and half of the kids that are dropping out are kids of color. So I commend you for your work, trying to help lower-income kids and trying to help everybody get a better education. But I think the status quo just isn't really working. I have traveled to a lot of schools, though, and been amazed at some of the schools. I went to Josephinum in Chicago, St. Anthony's in Milwaukee, Boys Latin School in Philadelphia, and just amazing success stories. And you see the success in front of you where 100% of the kids are going to college. Just amazing stories where, you know, 50, 40, 30% maybe of their contemporaries in their community are going. So there are great successes. But I think we need to think about the kids. People get so caught up in, oh, I don't want any religious schools or only private schools and all of this. And it's like, look at the kids and look at the success there. But I thought maybe if you take a couple of minutes and tell us about some of the things you've seen in Michigan, schools that you've either visited that are a success, or just some of what you've seen that has excited you about the potential that all these kids do have potential, and we shouldn't leave them, behind.
Well, thank you, Senator. Thanks for that opportunity. I would love to talk about some of the schools and some of the individuals that I have seen benefit from the success of being able to choose the right educational setting. And I've already mentioned the Potter's House School and John Boy, who's with us here today. That's a school I regularly visit. The students there come from a multitude of different countries, speak many different languages, and most of them are from very, very low-income circumstances. And it's just amazing to see the transformation that those students have in going through their Potter's House years. There's another student here right behind me, Denisha Merriweather, whom I've gotten to know the last few years, who is the recipient of a tax credit scholarship program in the state of Florida. Denisha will tell you very promptly that she had a very troubled early childhood in her grade school years. I think she was kicked out multiple times before her godmother actually finally found a school that was going to work for her, and the transformation was just almost overnight. Denisha's the first in her family to have graduated high school. She's graduated college, and in May she's going to get her master's in social work degree. So she's just a tremendous example of what can happen when you get an opportunity to go to the right school. Nydia Salazar is also here, and she has her mom took her and emigrated from Peru because of the opportunity. She knew she would have a much greater opportunity to succeed and thrive, and so Nydia has been the beneficiary of a tax credit scholarship program in Arizona, and she's now in college and pursuing a higher education there. Those are two students. There's many schools that I see that are doing amazing things, actually trying new and innovative ways of approaching education for children. And one of them I'd love to mention is called Acton Academy, and it's truly a unique model in that it's totally student-directed. They form their own constitution, and there's no teacher in the classroom. There's just a coach or a guide, and the guide cannot answer questions. They can only pose a question back to the students. And the results from this Acton Academy are simply amazing. And the school is actually proliferating pretty rapidly throughout the country. So those are just a few examples, but I could give you dozens more.
Well, and putting a face on it and meeting these kids and seeing that they're going to succeed and looking them in the eye and knowing that these young ladies are going to succeed is an amazing thing. And for those who have this philosophic hatred for vouchers and school choice and things, watch the movie Waiting for Superman and see the mom with tears down her face whose child got the lottery and won to get in a good school, and then the one who didn't get in. And Senator Alexander and I went to a KIPP charter school in Nashville, and we met a young woman there. She's got a full scholarship to Boston College, and I'll never forget, here we are, we like to talk to the media. The media didn't want to talk to us at all. They wanted to talk to this young lady because she was just an amazing success story. But I wish you the best of luck. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator.
Thank you, Senator Paul. Senator Franken.
Yes, I'm a member of the Minnesota DFL party, the party that the chairman invoked at the beginning of this hearing. Charter schools are not the issue here. Minnesota is thoroughly in the mainstream. There are 37 states in this country that constitutionally prohibit the use of public school money for religious schools. So it is the DFL party in Minnesota, thank you very much, that is in the mainstream, and not our witness or the chairman. Senator Lieberman mentioned proficiency in the NAEP test, and it just reminded me of this. when I first got in the Senate in 2009, I had a roundtable of principals, and one of the principals in Minnesota, and he said, we think of the NCLB tests as autopsies. And I knew exactly what he meant, because what he was saying is that the students take the test in late April. If they're lucky, they get them back in late June. The teachers can't use the results to inform their instruction. So I saw that in Minnesota, that in addition to the NCLB test, a lot of schools, majority of schools, were taking a computer adaptive test. A computer test so you get the results right away, and adaptive so that you can measure outside of grade level. And this brings me to the issue of proficiency, which the Senator cited, versus growth. And I would like your views on the relative advantage of measuring, doing assessments and using them to measure proficiency or to measure growth.
Well, thank you, Senator, for that question. I think if I'm understanding your question correctly around proficiency, I would also correlate it to competency and mastery, so that each student is measured according to the advancement that they're making in each subject area.
Well, that's growth. That's not proficiency. So in other words, the growth they're making is in growth. The proficiency is an arbitrary standard.
If they've reached a level, the proficiency is if they've reached a like third grade level for reading, et cetera.
No, I'm talking about the debate between proficiency and growth.
Yes.
And what your thoughts are on them.
Well, I was just asking to clarify then.
Well, this is a subject that has been debated in the education community for years. And I've advocated growth as the chairman, and every member of this committee knows, because with proficiency, teachers ignore the kids at the top who are not going to fall below proficiency, and they ignore the kid at the bottom who, no matter what they do, will never get to proficiency. So I've been an advocate of growth. But it surprises me that you don't know this issue. And, Mr. Chairman, I think this is a good reason for us to have more questions, because this is a very important subject, education, our kids' education. And I think we're selling our kids short by not being able to have a debate on it. And I didn't know of any rule about this, everyone gets one question and then one other senator gets a question. I don't know where that rule comes from.
Well, I'll tell you where it comes from, Senator Franken. It comes from the committee precedent and the way we treated President Obama's nominees, John King, and the way we treated Arne Duncan, and the way I was treated when I was a secretary.
But
I'm
all
going
of
to
us
apply,
have more
I'm applying the
questions.
same rules to them, to Secretary DeVos, or to Mrs. DeVos.
Well, I think we're selling
And I'm-
our kids short by not being able to ask follow-up questions. And I was kind of surprised, well, I'm not that surprised, that you did not know this issue. Mrs. DeVos, your family has a long history of supporting anti-LGBT causes, including donating millions of dollars to groups that push conversion therapy, the practice of trying to change someone's sexual orientation or gender identity. For example, you and your family have given over $10 million to Focus on the Family, an organization that currently states on its website that, quote, homosexual strugglers can and do change their sexual behavior and identity. Mrs. DeVos, conversion therapy has been widely discredited and rejected for decades by every mainstream medical and mental health organization as neither medically nor ethically appropriate. It has been shown to lead to depression, anxiety, drug use, homelessness, and suicide, particularly in LGBT youth. In fact, many of the leaders and founders of conversion therapy, including both religious ministries and mental health professionals, have not only publicly renounced it, but have issued formal apologies for their work and how harmful it has been to the individuals involved. Mr. Chairman, I would ask that this be included in the record.
It will be.
Mrs. DeVos, do you still believe in conversion therapy?
Senator Franken, I've never believed in that. First of all, let me say I fully embrace equality, and I believe in the innate value of every single human being, and that all students, no matter their age, should be able to attend a school and feel safe and be free of discrimination. So let's start there. And let me just say that your characterization of contributions, I don't think accurately reflects those of my family. I don't.
Well, you've been-
I would hope that you wouldn't include other family members beyond my core family.
Well, in terms of throwing numbers around, you said that student debt has increased by 1,000% since 2000.
980% in 8 years.
I'm sorry?
980%.
That's just
almost
not
1,000.
so. It's increased 118% in the past 8 years.
Well,
So I'm just asking, if you're challenging my figures, I would ask that you get your figures straight about education policy, and that's why we want more questions, because we want to know if this person that we are entrusting, or may entrust to be the Secretary of Education, if she has the breadth and depth of knowledge that we would expect from someone who has that important important job. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Franken. I had as many disagreements with Secretary King as you apparently do with Mrs. DeVos, and we're treating her in exactly the same way that we treated him. And I think that's what I would call the golden rule.
I did not hear one member of the committee ask more questions. And here, virtually every member of the minority is asking to ask more questions, and that's a very substantial difference.
We have, because you've got a nominee of the Republican Party. We're not going to treat a Republican nominee differently than we treat a Democratic nominee. We've had the same situation with both of President Obama's nominees. So we'll go to the next.
Chairman, I do want to put in the record that Michael Levitt had 2 rounds.
Michael Levitt was never the education secretary.
Well, Rod Page under Bush had 10-minute rounds. There is other precedent, so that's why my members really are asking.
I appreciate that, Senator Murray, and I appreciate your saying that. I'm trying to be fair by treating Mrs. DeVos in the same way we treated both of President Obama's education nominees. We'll go next to Senator Cassidy.
Mrs. DeVos, thanks. Good to see you again. Enjoyed our meeting in anticipation of this. I'm really struck the kind of reaction your nomination has elicited. So let me just ask some questions. Do you support public education?
Absolutely, Senator.
Man, that's amazing. You would think some would have us think that you do not. Do you believe that all children deserve to have the opportunity to receive quality education?
Absolutely, I do.
Do you support the rights of all children, regardless of income or race? By the way, this means a lot to me, this next one, to have the option to choose the school that meets their child's needs?
Absolutely, I do, and I commend you and your wife for the school that you've started that's specifically focused on dyslexic students.
I will tell you, by the way, my son is very bright, graduated from, speaking of dyslexia, graduated from an inner city school, public school, and then graduated with honors from some fancy school northeast. And my daughter, who has dyslexia, we're able to pay the tuition so that she can have her needs addressed. And not all parents can pay that tuition, so it matters very much to me that a parent, regardless of her income, can get her child's needs addressed. So thank you for doing that. Just a few more. Do you support the belief that decisions affecting our children's education are best left to the states and locals to decide, to allow them to tailor the education policies and programs that best meet the needs of their students?
I do indeed.
Oh my gosh. Do you view the role of the U.S. Secretary of Education as an opportunity to advance your personal education views and agenda?
Not mine personally. I'm going to hopefully be able to advance this president-elect's and also the views of many, many parents nationally.
As Secretary of Education, is it your intention to undermine our nation's public education system?
Not at all.
As Secretary, will you carry out the implementation of federal education laws in a way that reflects the very letter and intent of the law?
Indeed.
Do you intend to mandate, direct, coerce, or control any state, local school district, or school on any education program that is specifically prohibited by the Secretary in federal law, one such example being Common Core?
No.
Do you intend to mandate, direct, coerce, or control any state, local, school district, or school to require school choice policies, including private school vouchers or scholarships?
No.
Now, let's just clear that for the record. Next, you mentioned dyslexia. I am passionate about it. 20% of us are dyslexics, 20%. I'm told that 1 out of 4 children of color by age 4 read substantially, by 4th grade, read substantially below grade level. That's important because we learn to read, then we read to learn. If you've not learned to read, you're behind the 8 ball. So that is an issue I'm passionate about. As Secretary of Education, will you commit to working with me and others to find common ways to promote better awareness and understanding of dyslexia? And will you commit to working with me and this committee to develop better federal education policies to ensure that dyslexic children and all students with differences have the resources they need?
I would look forward to that opportunity, Senator.
Now, as Secretary, you may not agree to this one or not. Will you commit to working with me and this committee to develop new federal policies that will ensure the early screening for dyslexia in school are universal screenings for all students in school to ensure that any learning differences are diagnosed early and that the appropriate services are provided to students?
I would look forward to exploring that with you to see whether that's a federal role or whether that's best left to the states, but I would look forward to that opportunity.
That is a fair answer. I have a couple more I could ask, but this meeting is going long. I will thank you for your answers, and I will yield back.
Thank you, Senator.
Thank you, Senator Cassidy. Senator Bennett.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And in view of how fair you've been to me and to other members of the committee, it pains me to say this. I really wish we had a second round of questions, too. I really wish we had the tax returns from this nominee. I don't believe you are a precedent for this. When you became, when you were the nominee, you had been a governor, you'd been the president of a university. John King had been a school principal, had been the commissioner of education of the state of New York. Arne Duncan had been the superintendent of the Chicago Public Schools. Those were the experiences they brought to their committee hearing, and their records were well known and well established. There is no way in the period of time we have here that we're going to be able to elicit that level of background. So I would ask that some consideration be given to our having additional questions, and that the tax returns be made available to the committee. I want to thank Mrs. DeVos for your willingness to serve and for being here, for your passion about education for your family as well. I agree with you, and the committee members know this, that our public school system is not working for too many of our kids, particularly those living in poverty. I think that's utterly unacceptable, and the fact that we don't pay attention to it, the fact that we treat America's children like they're someone else's children, I think is something that this generation is going to have to pay for in the future. Every kid in this country should have access to a great public school. I support parents' choices among high-quality public schools and charter schools, and I think plays a critical role in education. But the goal for me has never been school choice for its own end. The goal is high-quality public schools where every kid in every neighborhood can receive a great education. For a kid from a low-income family, there's no difference between, there may be a philosophical difference, but there's no practical difference between forced to attend a terrible school and being given a chance to choose among 5 terrible schools. That's no choice at all, and it's certainly not a meaningful one. In Denver, we made a different deal. A deal that said we're going to create a public choice system, we're going to authorize charters, we're going to create innovation schools and strengthen traditional schools. But without exception, we demanded quality and implemented strong accountability. And as far as I can tell, Detroit and Michigan, to a degree, has followed exactly the opposite path. According to one analysis, the Detroit public schools, and by the way, it's not easy to figure this out because there's so little accountability in Michigan. The Detroit public schools average 9%. 9% of the kids are proficient. The charter schools do a little better. 14% of the kids are proficient. I'll stipulate that the charter schools are doing better, but that's a horrible outcome for everybody involved. According to an Education Trust report, 2013, the majority of charter schools in Michigan perform worse than the Detroit public, in Michigan, perform worse than the Detroit public schools, when it came to African American students in 8th grade math. Nearly half of charter schools in Michigan ranked in the bottom quarter of all schools statewide. So my question is this, not a false choice about whether we should have choice or whether we shouldn't have choice. We should have choice. But what you've learned in the last 20 years of this work in Michigan that has changed your mind about what it is that kids need in America in the 21st century?
Senator, thank you for that question. And first of all, I look forward to correcting some of the record regarding Detroit. And I think it's really important, first of all, to put Detroit in context. In 1950, there were 1.8 million people living in the city of Detroit. Today, there's less than 700,000, 675,000 roughly. Anyone with any means in the city of Detroit has basically, with school-age students, has basically left the city. And the students... the students there today...
With respect, I'm not asking for a history of Detroit. What I'd like to know, what I asked about was the last 20 years of school reform that you've been so involved with in Michigan.
Yes, but you were referring specifically to the Detroit schools. And
right.
The reality today is that 8 out of 10 students in Detroit are living in poverty. Nobody accepts that the results in Detroit overall are acceptable. There's clearly room for a lot more improvement, but the reality is that more than half of the
I'm sorry. What I'm sensitive because I'm not going to get a second round of questions. What have you learned about the failures of the Detroit public schools and Detroit charter schools that has informed your decision making as the Secretary of Education? What went wrong there that's going to go right in cities all across America as a result of your philosophy about how we ought to move the country forward?
Actually, I believe that there's a lot that has gone right in Detroit and in Michigan with regard to charter schools. And the notion that there hasn't been accountability is just wrong. It's it's false news. It's not correct at all. The reality is that charter schools in Michigan have been accountable, fully accountable to their overseeing bodies and to the state since their history.
If that's true, why are there so many failing charter schools in Michigan?
122 charter schools have been closed since charter schools came into existence in Michigan. And the reality today is that students attending charter schools in the city of Detroit are getting 3 months on average more learning than their counterparts in the traditional public schools. The recent legislation that was passed now actually brings all schools in Detroit under accountability, including the traditional schools. Heretofore, there's never been a traditional public school that's been closed due to poor performance. And so finally, for the people of Detroit, there is accountability across the board. And I'm pleased and thankful that that's the case.
I'm out of time, and I apologize. I'd like to say this, Mrs. DeVos, thank you for your willingness to do this, and I'd like to invite you to Denver, to the Denver Public Schools, if you'd be willing to come to see what we're working on there.
I would love to do that.
Thank you, Senator Bennett. Senator Young.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Mrs. DeVos, I thank you so much for putting yourself forward for this position. I think you'll make a fine Secretary of Education. I'd like to bring up to your attention something we discussed in our office, and we spent quite a bit of time talking about teachers. I think you actually started talking about teachers, and it was encouraging here today that in your prepared remarks you said we're blessed beyond measure by educators who pour themselves into their students. I shared with you, I'm a father of 4 young children, age 10 and under, and I've really come to appreciate how essential it is to have prepared teachers who are empowered to do their very best work and immersed in an atmosphere that's supportive. That's my objective in part in sitting on this committee is to try and play a constructive role in that process, hopefully working with you. My wife, her family is full of teachers. In fact, a number of them are still teaching today in a low-income town in Indiana, Paoli, Indiana. I like to look to the evidence, and I'm always open to evidence from all comers. But there's a 2007 study, not all that dated, by McKinsey & Company. They examined education systems all around the world, to try and figure out what works, what makes for an effective education environment. And it wasn't the amount of money spent per student. In fact, we've tried that in this country. In 1970, the cost to educate a student was roughly $57,000. Adjusting for inflation, 40 years later, it was $165,000 per student. So we know right there it's not money. But what McKinsey found, that one of the most important factor was the quality of our teachers. I feel very strongly that we need to remove barriers to quality teaching and enable and equip these teachers to do their very best work. And as someone who's studied this issue extensively, I'd just like to get your thoughts on how we might do that.
Well, thank you, Senator, and I did enjoy our meeting in your office as well, talking about some of these issues. I believe, first, let me restate again that a quality teacher cannot be, the importance of a quality teacher cannot be overstated. And I think that the opportunities abound for empowering and re-empowering teachers in a new way, unleashing and unencumbering them with a lot of rules and regulations today that really prohibit and inhibit creativity and innovation with their students. You know, when you take a step back and look at how we deliver education today, for the most part, it hasn't changed significantly in a century and a half. And yet, the world has changed significantly. And so I think that there's a great opportunity, and this goes for teachers of all kinds of schools and all varieties, and that is to really empower them in a new way to do what they do best. And I know that in a couple of the states that when charter schools were actually introduced, those that founded the charter schools were actually teachers who were wanting to express themselves in a different way and found a new opportunity to unleash from their previous circumstances.
Thanks. In my remaining 90 seconds here, I'll just emphasize that I've spent the last 4 years in the House of Representatives focused in the main on trying to ascertain whether or not our social support programs, those programs that are targeted towards helping the poor, the needy, the vulnerable, those who need a hand up in society, whether or not those programs are working. And what I discovered is there are roughly 80 of these programs, depending upon how you count them. Of those 80, only 12 have ever been rigorously evaluated using the gold standard of evaluation, randomized controlled trial, multi-site, and of those 12, only one has been found to meaningfully work, and even that one's a bit complicated. So we need to apply evidence-based approaches to the education system in the same sort of way, and just stare at the evidence and let it guide us accordingly, hopefully in a bipartisan way. And do I have your assurance that you'll operate in this fashion? It's a threshold issue for me.
Absolutely, Senator. I think it's a great opportunity, and if confirmed, I would look forward to working with you on that.
All right. Thank you.
Thanks, Senator Young. Senator Whitehouse.
Thank you, Chairman. Good evening, Ms. Vos. Welcome to the committee. It is reputed, at least, that Sigmund Freud said there are times when a cigar is just a cigar. And there are times when charter schools are just charter schools. And I think when that's the case, everybody in this room supports them. Certainly, we have a very strong charter school community in Rhode Island. But there are times when it appears that charter schools are used as a wedge to attack public education. And the signals of that tend to be that failing charter schools are protected compared to failing public schools, that the standards really aren't there. As I said, in Rhode Island, we demand a lot of our charter schools. They succeed very well. We are proud of them. But I have read that 80% of charter schools in Michigan are run by for-profit entities, and most of them perform below the state average, suggesting that a failing charter school is automatically better than a successful traditional public school in the view of that system. And we in Rhode Island wouldn't want to see that system moved into Rhode Island or moved to a national level. Second signal is when the charter school advocates fail to recognize, as I believe you have actually recognized, that there are ongoing costs and responsibilities that a traditional public school must continue to shoulder, even as students leave with their funding for charter schools. And that is so clear a proposition now that the investment service Moody's has written about it and talked about the danger of a downward spiral because it actually adds cost when you have to maintain the public traditional school and the charter school until the system can adjust. Can you assure us that your desire for charter schools is sincere and that as the Secretary of Education, you will steer away from efforts to deny traditional public schools the funding that they need to manage the charter school transition, and that you will make sure that charter schools have to live up to their promise, and you're not just going after traditional public schools when they are failing?
Senator, thanks for that question. Let me just begin by again stating that my advocacy and my orientation is really around parents and students and their choosing the right education for their children. And so when parents choose charter schools, they're doing so because they think that it's a better spot for their children. And you have my commitment that I will be an advocate for all great schools, no matter their form, their version. I will be an advocate for parents being able to make those choices because they're the primary educator for their children.
I get that, but the question is, do you understand that when the parent makes that choice and the child moves to the charter school and the funding moves with the child, that leaves a funding gap at the previous school that it can't instantaneously or magically fill? That is a real problem that Moody's
Indeed, and I think, I think this is a good example of an issue that is best addressed at the state level by each state and acknowledging that each state will have unique circumstances in that regard.
The problem is that it will be hard to address that at the state level if you make the Federal Department of Education a crusader for moving kids to charter schools without any recognition of the legacy costs of the public school system. If it is your intention to create a downward spiral, that is not solved by different state policies. That's where we need you, as Secretary of Education, to commit to recognize that there is this problem and that you will keep in mind not only the charter schools and the parents going there, but the traditional schools and the parents staying there.
Well, certainly, I think, as we spoke in your office, I think that this is an issue, and it's probably unique to some states more than it is to others. But again, I will refer back to the implementation of the Every Student Succeeds Act and the opportunities that states have to address the unique challenges of their states. I will be a crusader for parents and students and the quality of their education, not for specific systems and not for specific arrangements of how school is delivered.
Let me ask you just one other quick question. For 10 years, you served on the board of the Acton Institute for the Study of Religion and Liberty, which calls climate change unfounded and of undue concern. You and your husband have contributed to the Thomas More Law Center, touting itself as the sword and shield for people of faith, which has repeatedly promoted fake science, even going so far as to represent the Dover Area School District of Pennsylvania in a lawsuit over the adoption of a biology textbook including intelligent design. The S in STEM, which everybody is for, is science. If school districts around the country try to teach students junk science, will the Department of Education be with the students or with the political entities trying to force the junk science into the science programs?
Well, Senator, I think it's pretty clear that the expectation is that science is taught in public schools, and I support the teaching of great science, and especially science that is that allows students to exercise critical thinking and to really discover and examine in new ways. And science is to be supported at all levels.
I would have liked, Mr. Chairman, to make some inquiries about Pell Grants, to follow up on some of these answers, which were directed towards the question, but maybe not completely responsive to the question, and to ask about where the department will go on this nightmarish problem of college for-profits that have taken these kids and robbed them of their education, robbed them of their money, and set them loose with a piece of paper that isn't worth anything. And I believe this is, as I said, I'm very fond of you, and I'm very fond of this committee, and I don't recall ever being told that I could never have a second round in a hearing as a matter of principle before.
Thanks, Senator Whitehouse. I'm going to take my 5-minute round now and go back to something that Mrs. DeVos brought up and something that several senators have brought up. I want to talk about the law that the President called the Christmas miracle that this committee produced, which fixed No Child Left Behind, that was passed in December 2015. Under the current administration, the plans are, under the law we call ESSA, Senator Franken may have been the first person to suggest that, but the plan we call... No. 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 I should have known better. Yeah, I know. The department is on a path to say to states, go ahead and every state will have to get their new Title I plan in to get their federal money and their Title II plan, which is really a tremendous opportunity to take advantage of the innovation states have wanted and the flexibility that we have given them. The current administration is on a path to say to states, get your plans in, and we'll approve them in the spring or in the summer, and you can then implement the plans in the school year that begins next year. Is it your intention to continue on that path, on that schedule?
Absolutely, Senator. And if there's any confusion or question around transition, rest assured it would be a high priority, if confirmed, for me to ensure that the plan is adhered to and that the law is implemented as you all intended.
My guess is in most of our states, plans are being circulated among various groups, and people will, if you are confirmed, people will be looking for a signal from you that go ahead and get your plan in spring and summer, and we'll try to approve it or consider it so that you can get on in the next year. My second question is, as you can tell, we have some considerable differences of opinion here in the committee, and we resolved them well enough to pass a bill that I think 85 of us voted for. We worked out some difficult issues. We even put what Senator Murray likes to call guardrails on the states, and what we like, and we even put some guardrails on the Secretary of Education, which my colleagues on the Democratic side may now think better of that we did that. But what is your attitude toward respecting the authority that Congress gives you and trying to implement the law according to the way it's written rather than trying to legislate from where you are? For example, you believe very strongly in giving low-income parents more choices of schools. We debated that and only got 45 votes for Senator Scott's bill and for my bill, so it's not in the law. Would you then try to write a regulation to implement that through the U.S. Department of Education, even though Congress couldn't do it?
Senator, it would be my goal, if confirmed, to implement laws as you intended them. I acknowledge that it's your role to write laws and pass laws, and it would be the department's role to implement as intended, and that's my commitment.
So you wouldn't be, no matter how strongly you feel about school choice, for example, you wouldn't be prepared to mandate Washington State or Tennessee to adopt a particular school choice plan?
No, I would hope I could convince you all of the merit of that in maybe some future legislation, but certainly not any kind of mandate from within the department.
The Scholarship for Kids legislation that I proposed that got 45 votes, which wasn't enough, and that Senator Scott proposed a more limited version, which had to do with students with disabilities, basically said that we could take the $24 billion of federal dollars we now spend $24 billion of the federal dollars we now spend. And a state could choose to take its share of that money and turn it into $2,100 scholarships and let it follow the students to the schools that the state chose. So if the state did not approve of dollars going to private schools or religious schools that were accredited, it didn't have to do that. Or if a state did that, which I think 25 do, it could do that. So in that case, it would allow the states to make the decision and the parents to make the choice rather than Washington giving an order that you have to do school choice. Is that the kind of school choice proposal that you would support or not?
Yes, absolutely. And we've seen a wide variety of approaches to school choice, including private school choice in the now 25 states in which programs exist. And so I think it would really be dependent on each state's political realities and culture and how they wanted to approach that opportunity and that option, or if they wanted to expand it, that would be another alternative as well.
Thank you. Senator Baldwin.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to weigh in also that I hope that we will get additional opportunity to ask questions. I would like it to be not in writing, but to give the American people a chance to hear the exchange and the responses. Mr. Chairman, I also associate myself with the concerns raised by our ranking member regarding the holding of this hearing prior to receipt of the Office of Government Ethics plan for elimination of possible conflicts of interest. And Mrs. DeVos, you had the chance to answer questions already about your and your family's indirect investments in education-related for-profit companies, including Social Finance and Performant, which I understand to be a collection agency that specializes in student debt collection. So I won't repeat those there, but let me get to that ethics agreement that will be forthcoming. One decision you will need to make is whether to take advantage of Section 1043 of the Internal Revenue Code, which allows you to defer capital gains taxes on the sale of assets divested in order to comply with ethics rules. This provision can allow wealthy individuals to save hundreds of millions of dollars. It's why, when I became aware of this, that I joined Senators Whitehouse and Warren on this committee, as well as our colleague Senator Feinstein, in introducing a bill to close this loophole, or at least limit it, the amount of capital gains that could be deferred to $1 million. Because we don't have your financial information yet from the Office of Government Ethics, my question to you is, are you planning on taking advantage of this tax loophole?
Senator, thank you for that question. Let me just restate again that I look forward to the ethics agreement finalization with the Office of Government Ethics and am committed to ensuring that I have no conflicts and will go forward with no conflicts. With respect to your specific question, I do not intend to take advantage of that loophole. I've already made that conclusion, that decision. And in fact, it probably would be useful to note here that, again, if confirmed, I will only take a salary of $1 so I can be official, but I don't intend to take a salary either.
I also listened carefully to your opening statement and your exchange with Senator Franken related to your sizable donations to a number of anti-LGBT organizations that have been associated with advocacy for the discredited practice of conversion therapy. I was heartened by your response, I will say. But I would note that these same organizations, anti-LGBT organizations, also have been hostile to non-discrimination protections, issues like adoption, marriage equality. Given the alarm that parents have expressed to me about these donations to anti-LGBT organizations, I guess I want to ask, I assume that there are LGBT students and their parents watching tonight. What would you say to them to assure them that you're going to use your position as secretary to support LGBT students or students with LGBT parents?
Thank you, Senator. Let me just restate again that I embrace equality, and I firmly believe in the intrinsic value of each individual, and that every student should have the assurance of a safe and discrimination-free place to become educated. And I want to restate those principles, those values for me. Let me just comment to the contributions that you've referred to again and suggest that you may be confusing some other family members in some of those contributions, and also looking at contributions from 18 or 20 years ago. So I just want to again refer to what I just said about my approach. As a mom, I just can't imagine having a child that would feel discriminated against for any reason, and I would want my child in a safe environment.
I note that I have run out of time, and Mr. Chairman, I have many more questions that I would like to propound. I will say, Mrs. DeVos, if you think that there is, and we've been fairly general given our restricted time, about the issue of charitable contributions, if you will, or contributions to these anti-LGBT advocacy organizations. If you feel like there has been a family member who has contributed and you're being identified and that the public record is incorrect, please in writing follow up. But I have certainly seen information quite to the contrary.
Thank you, Senator Baldwin. Senator Roberts.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for holding the hearing, and I thank the ranking member as well. Mrs. DeVos, thank you for being responsive, articulate, informed, and in my view, specific. I suppose, Mr. Chairman, all members could submit any specific questions they have for the record, and we could have a time period on that, and then if they had any concern, they could always speak on the Senate floor. Thank you for coming by my office, and we had a nice visit. I let you know that way back, I had the opportunity to teach also while trying to put out a newspaper on the west side of Phoenix, not Kansas, but Phoenix. But at any rate, I know you fully understand a one-size-fits-all education system just does not work. You just said that in your testimony. And I told you that I held a roundtable discussion in Kansas at Washburn University in Topeka with 12 college presidents. We got all of them except a few, and 12 business stakeholders, very important to those universities, to discuss higher education and workforce development, given the fact that we are going to attempt to pass a higher education bill. In particular, I heard from the higher education leaders about the impact of federal programs, obviously, policies, obviously, but more especially regulations on Kansas institutions of higher education. During our meeting last month in my office, I shared with you an information chart. I need a bigger chart. It's like the guy who said he needed a bigger boat with a shark coming after him. Maybe that's not a proper allegory, but at any rate, these are 34 topics or areas of federal regulation. Some of them very, very, very important. But the collective judgment was that they were so intrusive, so expensive, so time-consuming that they had to get an Office of Compliance just to look at the federal regulations, and then they assigned bad news bearers to go tell all the various departments that make up the Johnson County Community College, which, by the way, has the highest enrollment of any college or university in Kansas, more than the Jayhawks, more than the Wildcats, and more than the Shockers. And these 34 areas of federal regulation, so costly and impactful to the school, basically indicate that we need to work together to eliminate many of these burdensome regulations that hinder the institutions of higher education's main goal to educate our students effectively and efficiently. So, as you know, I think everybody, and I think I would have agreement on the other side of the dais as well, regulations are one of the key areas this committee will focus on as we work on reauthorization of the Higher Education Act. Will you be a partner in addressing many of these time-consuming regulations?
Senator, thanks for that question, and thanks for the meeting in your office. I appreciate seeing the chart again. As I'm a visual learner, I really appreciate that one in particular. But yes, I can commit to you that if confirmed, I will look forward to working with you and this committee on that act and on the regulations that you've referred to, and wanting to help free our institutions of higher learning to the greatest extent possible to do what they do best.
Now, being an ombudsman for Kansas education, along with my fellow senator, it's tough when you try to go directly to the person who is in charge of that department, namely you. And I tried that before, sitting down across from President Obama and complaining about regulation to learn of his executive order to make sure every department ascribed to a cost-benefit yardstick, if you will. That didn't happen. The person in charge that was supposed to get back to me was his top gun, his right arm, Dennis. Dennis was in charge of war and peace and other things. I'm going to recommend that maybe ought to do it regionally. Obviously, we've had people from rural areas, urban areas. It's going to be terribly important that we get to somebody that can actually see the problem, report back to you or to somebody else in your department. You can't do all this. I don't know anybody that can. But at least when we have a real problem with the 12 universities, or for that matter, 5 or 6 or even 1, and saying, hey, here's a regulation that just doesn't make sense, can we at least address it? Maybe we can tweak it, maybe we can get rid of it, or maybe we can do better. So I hope that you can work out some kind of SWAT team, if you will, with regards to overregulation, because that really was the #1 issue that I heard. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. I think that sounds like a great idea.
Thank you, Senator Roberts. Senator Murphy.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. If Senator Alexander decided to allow us more than a meager 5 minutes of questions, Mr. Voss, do you have anywhere to be tonight? Would you be able to stick around and answer those questions?
I am going to defer to the chairman on this.
Okay, I assume you probably don't have other obligations. Let me just count myself in. I think this is a real shame, this rush job, this inability to allow the public to see this debate, the imperative to get this hearing in before we have all the information. I think it really violates the best traditions of this committee, and it suggests that this committee is trying to protect this nominee from scrutiny, and I hope we would reconsider. Mr. Voss, let me try to rush through these questions in the time that I have. Your family has been investors in a company called K-12. It's a for-profit online charter operator. Gets about 80% of its money from the federal or state taxpayers, and it paid its CEO over $1 million in the first year. It's made millions and millions of dollars in profit. I could go through a long litany of examples in which people have made their fortune off of public education dollars. A charter school principal in Orlando who got a $519,000 payout when her school was closed for poor performance. I guess my question is simple. Do you support companies and individuals profiting from public education dollars that is essentially taking money away from students to pay salaries for CEOs in return for investors?
Senator, thank you for that question. Let me just say that when it comes to education, I think what's important is what the outcomes are, what the achievements are. And I don't think the delivery mechanism is the issue as much as it is our students receiving the benefit of a great education.
Have you met many
And
have you met many principals in Detroit that say that they have enough, that they don't need more?
I can't really answer that question. I haven't asked them specifically if they have enough.
So if we can't agree that folks shouldn't get rich off of schools, then maybe we can agree that they shouldn't be getting rich off of terrible schools. You and I had the chance to talk in my office about the accountability regulations that were a big part of the underlying new federal education law. The department has issued final regulations that incorporate comments of basically everyone in the education field to make sure that to the extent public dollars are flowing to private schools, that they meet real standards. These accountability regulations are supported by the Council of Chief State School Officers, the School Superintendents Association, civil rights groups, teachers' unions. Can you assure this committee that you're going to implement those accountability regulations to make sure that all schools are performing and not throw ESSA implementation into chaos for states and districts around the country? Are you going to implement those accountability regulations?
Senator, let me just restate again that I think accountability is highly important, and I support accountability for all schools, which is why I supported the most recent legislation in Michigan that is now holding all schools, including traditional public schools, accountable for performance. And I will continue to support accountability, and I will continue to support the implementation of Every Student Succeeds Act as Congress has intended it.
But let me ask you again, are you going to support the implementation of the existing regulations, again, supported by a wide cross-section of the educational community, that requires schools to come up with their own accountability standards, state and local based, that will require that all schools meet some basic performance standards? I'm asking you a specific question about this existing regulation and whether you're going to support it or whether you're going to use your position to undermine it or to change it.
Well, as would be tradition with a change of administrations, I will look forward to reviewing that. And again, I will restate my orientation to pro-accountability and pro-responsibility to parents and taxpayers.
I think that's going to raise a lot of questions for administrators and school superintendents who are now trying to implement that regulation. One final question. Do you think that guns have any place in or around schools?
I think that's best left to locales and states to decide. If the underlying question is...
you can't say definitively today that guns shouldn't be in schools?
Well, I will refer back to Senator Enzi and the school that he was talking about in Wapiti, Wyoming. I think probably there, I would imagine that there's probably a gun in the school to protect from potential grizzlies.
If President Trump moves forward with his plan to ban gun-free school zones, will you support that proposal?
I will support what the president-elect does, but Senator, if the question is around gun violence and the results of that, please know that my heart bleeds and is broken for those families that have lost any individual due to gun violence.
I look forward to working with you, but I also look forward to you coming to Connecticut and talking about the role of guns in schools.
Thank you, Senator Murphy. Senator Scott.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mrs. DeVos, for taking the time to be here and your willingness to serve. And a couple of questions I have as it relates to kids who are consistently attending schools that are underperforming. If you look at the outcomes of their lives of the children, which I think is a very important and should be a central part of this conversation that we're having, is how is the education system that our kids are involved in preparing them for the future that we hope we all get to live, a future that includes achieving the American dream. But when we look at the underperforming schools, and specifically schools in the rural areas as well as in the inner cities, many schools are still underperforming. Kids that come from those underperforming schools consistently have significantly higher rates of incarceration. They have significantly higher rates of unemployment. the importance of education can't be emphasized enough for the quality of the life that the child will experience, the responsibilities that the government will bear because of that poor education system. So what we can do to make sure that there's access to quality education in every zip code should be of paramount importance for this nation, for this committee, as well as the entire Senate. I'd love to hear your thoughts on that before I get into the Perkins CTE programs.
Senator, I thank you for that question and for the thought and your observations and experience behind it. And I couldn't agree more that we have continued to do a disservice to so many young people in our country by continuing to force them to attend schools that are simply not working for them or not working for many. And the fact that 1.4 million students drop out of school every year, that's one every 42 seconds. It's a human tragedy. When you think about the lost human potential, and as you've mentioned, essentially a pipeline to prison for so many of those students, that's why I continue to be an advocate for allowing parents and empowering parents with the opportunity to make the right choices for their children. And I understand that there's a full range of those choices based on the realities of a state, and that's why states really need to grapple with this issue in a meaningful way. And if confirmed, I hope to be able to talk with governors and legislators about opportunities and options that they have to address the needs of the students to whom you've referred.
Thank you very much. I think there's another part of the education apparatus that doesn't get enough good attention. So often we think of technical schools as a subpar choice, as the place you go if you can't get into a four-year school. It's as if we have this bachelor's addiction that may not be in the best interest of the student. I hope that you are committed to taking a serious look at encouraging and providing great support for our high-quality technical schools. I know in South Carolina, the importance of our technical schools can't be overemphasized. When we think about the high-tech manufacturing hub, it really, for us in South Carolina, starts in our technical schools. They create the hub, in all honesty. The sectors that we benefit from in the transportation sector, from the Boeing 9,000 jobs in Little Charleston, South Carolina, to the BMWs, to the Mercedes, the Michelins, the Bridgestones. Our technical schools are the reason why we're succeeding on the high-tech manufacturing jobs. One of the things I've noted is that we probably need to have a robust conversation about making sure that there's flexibility in the coursework at some of the technical schools, because there is almost 6 million openings in this country. 75% do not require a college degree, which means that if we can align what's available in a marketplace with the training in the technical schools, we might solve a major part of our unemployment.
Absolutely, Senator. I think students, as they anticipate higher education, really need to have a full menu of options shared with them, and they need to know and understand where the opportunities are, what the costs are for the various avenues that they might take, and certainly technical schools, community colleges, apprenticeships. There's really a wide variety of alternative pathways to a really great future if students are really made aware of them.
I know I'm about out of time, Mr. Chairman, but just to finish, there are, you may be familiar with the 529 plans that provide, I think you can put about $50,000 into an account for college education. I think 529 plans could be a wonderful apparatus to be able to pay for or subsidize some of the cost, even K through 12. I would love for us to have a longer conversation on that.
Would look forward to that, Senator. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Scott. Senator Warren.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As the only other party to the so-called precedent of we don't have a second round, I asked my staff to actually pull the record from the hearing we had with King. And you said, when you called on me, I think we have time for a second round. Senator Warren, you can be the first in the second round. Just turns out I was the only one who stayed and had questions. So
That's why we had time.
I understood that that precedent meant that anybody who had questions for a second round could stay and ask them. And while we're doing precedents, I also understand that the precedent was that President Obama's nominees that came before this committee had all filled out their ethics forms, and that those were available before we had a hearing so that we would have a chance to ask questions about them in public. So I'm a little confused about what precedent means here. Ms. DeVos, many of my Democratic colleagues have pointed out your lack of experience in K-12 public schools, but I'd like to ask you about your qualifications for leading the nation on higher education. The Department of Education is in charge of making sure that the $150 billion that we invest in students each year gets into the right hands, and that students have the support they need to be able to pay back their student loans. The Secretary of Education is essentially responsible for managing a $1 trillion student loan bank and distributing $30 billion in Pell Grants to students each year. The financial futures of an entire generation of young people depend on your department getting that right. Now, Mrs. DeVos, do you have any direct experience in running a bank?
Senator, I do not.
Have you ever managed or overseen a $1 trillion loan program?
I have not.
How about a $1 billion loan program?
I have not.
Okay, so no experience in managing a program like this. How about participating in one? I think it's important for the person who is in charge of our financial aid programs to understand what it's like for students and their families who are struggling to pay for college. Mrs. DeVos, have you ever taken out a student loan from the federal government to help pay for college?
I have not.
Have any of your children had to borrow money in order to go to college?
They have been fortunate not to.
Have you had any personal experience with a Pell Grant?
Not personal experience, but certainly friends and students with whom I've worked.
So you have no personal experience with college financial aid or management of higher education. Mrs. DeVos, then let's start with the basics. Do you support protecting federal taxpayer dollars from waste, fraud, and abuse?
Absolutely.
Oh, good. So do I. Because now we all know that President-elect Trump's experience with higher education was to create a fake university, which resulted in his paying a $25 million to students that he cheated. So I'm curious about how the Trump administration would protect against waste, fraud, and abuse at similar for-profit colleges. So here's my question. How do you plan to protect taxpayer dollars from waste, fraud, and abuse by colleges that take in millions of dollars in federal student aid?
Senator, if confirmed, I will certainly be very vigilant.
Yeah, I'm asking how. How are you going to do that? You said you're committed.
The individuals with whom I work in the department will ensure that federal monies are used properly and appropriately, and I will look forward to working with you.
So you're going to subcontract making sure that what happened with universities that cheat students doesn't happen anymore?
No, I didn't say
You're going to give that to someone else to do? I just want to know what your ideas are for making sure we don't have problems with waste, fraud, and abuse.
I want to make sure we don't have problems with that as well. And if confirmed, I will work diligently to ensure that we are addressing any of those issues.
Well, let me make a suggestion on this. It actually turns out that there are a whole group of rules that are already written and are there, and all you have to do is enforce them. So what I want to know is, will you commit to enforcing these rules to ensure that no career college receives federal funds unless they can prove that they are actually preparing their students for gainful employment and not cheating them?
Senator, I will commit to ensuring that institutions which receive federal funds are actually serving their students well.
And so you will enforce the gainful employment rule to make sure that these career colleges are not cheating students?
We will certainly review that rule.
You'll
and
review
see that,
it? You will not commit to enforce it?
And see that it is actually achieving what the intentions are.
I don't understand about reviewing it. We talked about this in my office. There are already rules in place to stop waste, fraud, and abuse. and I don't understand how you can not be sure about enforcing them. You know, swindlers and crooks are out there doing backflips when they hear an answer like this. If confirmed, you will be the cop on the beat. And if you can't commit to use the tools that are already available to you in the Department of Education, then I don't see how you can be the Secretary of Education. And I look forward to having a second round of questions.
Thank you, Senator Warren. Senator Collins.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, I could not help but think that if my friends on the other side of the aisle had used their time to ask questions rather than complaining about the lack of a second round, they each would have been able to get in a second question. And I now just use 15 seconds of my time to make that point. Mrs. DeVos, first of all, let me say that I have no doubt that you care deeply about the education of all children. And I say that despite the fact that you and I do not agree on all the issues. Given your lifelong work and commitment to education, any suggestion, such as was made earlier, that your nomination is linked to your political contributions is really unfair and unwarranted. And I just want to say that for the record. I now would like to move on to some questions about how you view the federal role in education versus the state and local role. I want to put aside the DC Opportunity Scholarship Program because Congress's relationship to the District of Columbia is unique. And I want to ask you, at what level of government do you believe that decisions about charter schools and vouchers should be made? Is that a federal role or is that a state role?
Well, thank you, Senator, for that question. And let me just say I really enjoyed the conversation we had in your office. And let me respond to your question about federal versus state and local role by saying I absolutely support the fact that it is a state role and state decision what kind of offering there might be with regard to choices in education. And as we discussed in your office, you know, Maine has some unique it has a unique situation with students attending school on islands and in rural areas. And to suggest that the right answer for Maine is the same as the right answer for Indiana or any other state is just not right. And I would not support a federal mandate and a federal role in dictating those.
I'm glad to hear that. I have heard repeatedly from school officials, whether it's superintendents, teachers, or school board members, that the single most important action that the federal government could take would be to fulfill the promise of the 1975 Individuals with Disabilities Education Act to fund 40% of the additional cost of educating a special needs child. It's been many years since that law was passed. We have never come close to the 40%. Would you commit to taking a look at the funding of the department to see if we could do a better job of moving toward fulfillment of that promise? That is an action that would help every single school district in this country.
Senator, absolutely, I would commit to that if confirmed. And I actually think this is an area that could be considered for a approach that would be somewhat different in that maybe the money should follow individual students instead of going directly to the states. But again, I think that's something that we could discuss, and I would look forward to talking about with the members of this committee.
Another of my concerns, having worked at a college level for a period of time, is the low rate of college completion. There's nothing worse than a student being saddled with educational debt and not earning the credential or the degree that would enable that student to pay off that debt. I'm a strong supporter of the Federal TRIO program, which helps prepare students for higher education and helps to raise aspirations, particularly of children who come from families without experience in higher education. Do you have any thoughts on how we can do a better job in supporting college success programs so that we can ensure that students are able to complete their degrees or earn their credential?
Senator, thank you. I do think that we can do a better job with preparing students, informing them before they enter college. And I know the TRIO program helps to mentor and prepare students that might not otherwise have an opportunity. And I think that's a very important and valid one to look at for perhaps, is there another and more effective way to advance that or to replicate that or use that in a new way to help increase the participation of students that may not otherwise pursue higher education and complete it.
Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Collins. Senator Hassan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and Ranking Member Murray. I certainly look forward to working on this committee with all of you, and I appreciate the opportunity to participate. And Mrs. DeVos, it's nice to see you again. Thank you for being here today and your family as well. And I think all of us here share a commitment to public education and understand the essential nature to our democracy. I would echo my colleagues' call for another round, at least, of questioning, because I think our job here is not just to talk about ideas, but actually to drill down to how things actually work in practice. And so I want to talk about one of those situations that we began to touch on in my office when we met. And it echoes a little bit of what Senator Collins was just talking about in terms of full commitment to our students with disabilities, and what Senator Cassidy was talking about in terms of access to quality education for children with dyslexia. My son, Ben, experiences very severe physical disabilities. He has cerebral palsy. He can't speak. He can't use his fingers for a keyboard. He doesn't walk. But he's smart and the best kid on earth, I do say so myself. He got a quality public education at our local school. He's a graduate of Exeter Area High School in Exeter, New Hampshire. And the reason he got there was because countless advocates and champions before the Hassan family worked so hard to make sure that he had the right to that education. And I am concerned that when students who experience disabilities receive a publicly funded voucher to attend a private school, they often don't receive adequate resources, and in some cases have to sign over their legal rights under the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. So do you think that families should have a recourse in the courts if their child's education does not adequately meet his or her needs, whether it's at a school where they get a voucher or in a more traditional public school?
Thank you, Senator, for that question. And again, I appreciated our meeting earlier last week. Let me begin by saying I appreciate and am thankful that you've had the opportunity with your son, Ben, to find the right setting for him. And I would advocate for all parents to be able to have that opportunity to choose the right school for their child.
I had the opportunity to send him to the same public school that my daughter went to, because the law required that that school provide him resources that were never provided before that law was passed, because they're hard. And so the question is, will you enforce the law again with regard to kids with disabilities if a voucher program did allow them to go someplace else and the school said it's just too expensive, we don't want to do it?
I think that there are great examples of programs that are already underway in states. Ohio has a great program, and in fact, Sam and his mom are here today, beneficiary of the John Peterson Special Needs Scholarship Program.
But I understand that, and because my time is limited, excuse me for interrupting, but what I'm asking you is there is at least one voucher program in Florida, the McKay Voucher Program, which makes students sign away their rights before they can get that voucher. I think that is fundamentally wrong, and I think it will mean that students with disabilities cannot use a voucher system that a department under your leadership might start. So I want to know whether you will enforce and whether you will make sure that children with disabilities do not have to sign away their legal rights in order to get a voucher, should a voucher program be developed.
Well, I'd love to comment to the McKay Scholarship Program in Florida, where I believe today 31,000 students are taking advantage of it, and 93% of the parents that are utilizing that voucher are very, very pleased with the,
and I'm
as
sorry,
opposed to 30-some% that of
and
parents
you are,
happy with
and
the assigned
I'm sorry,
school.
but that isn't the question I asked. So for right now, I'm going to move on to one final question. I really do wish we had a second round, because there's a lot here that is critical to our children, especially with disabilities. And with all due respect, Ms. DeVos has not answered my question. But the other question I had, again, because we don't have a second round, I'm trying to follow up on an answer you gave earlier to some of my colleagues. I understand that there is a foundation, the Edgar and Elsie Prince Foundation, which I take it is a foundation named for your parents. Is that correct?
It's my mother's foundation.
It's your mother's foundation, and you sit on the board.
I do not.
You do not?
No.
Okay, so when it made its over $5 million donation to focus on the family, you didn't know anything about it?
My mother makes the decisions for her foundation.
Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Hassan. Senator Burr.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ms. DeVos, thank you for agreeing to serve. I think a lot of Americans watch what goes on here and say, God, never me. I'll never go through it. And I think most of us say that after an election cycle. And it's rare to find somebody who's the full Monty. I mean, you don't have to do this. That's apparent. You didn't have to choose education as your life's ambition, but you did. So I thank you for the investment that you made for all the kids that have been impacted, for the unbelievable statistics that you know about Florida or about wherever, and I'm sure you and the senator from Minnesota can come to an agreement on what the numbers were that he was talking about. But I've sat here and I remember in my first election going in to get the support of educators. And I was 10 minutes into what looked to be a 30 or 45-minute question and answer. And after 10 minutes, I looked and said, are there any questions that deal with kids or outcomes? And they said no. So I got up and left. You know, we can ask you all sorts of questions about you personally and what you've done, but you came into my office, and before I ever asked a question, in several minutes, you convinced me that you were passionate about making sure that every child had the opportunity at a successful education. And from that every child that got that education would have an opportunity to reach for the American dream of a life that's unlimited, an opportunity that's unlimited. So you'd convinced me without me asking a question. I've only got one question today. Why is it so difficult for us to figure out how to focus on outcome versus to get so hung up on process?
Well, Senator, I think that's a very good question, and I think we could have a very robust debate in this room about that. But I think that human tendency is to protect and guard what is, because change is difficult. And yet, We see the fact that there are millions of students who are simply not getting the opportunity for an equal opportunity for a quality education. And we try to tinker around from the top, and we try to fix things, but it becomes more about the system, I'm afraid, than it does about what's right for each child. And so I thank you for your support and your encouragement around the notion that every child should have the opportunity, every parent should have the opportunity on behalf of their child to choose the right educational environment for them. And I'm hopeful that if we can continue having a robust conversation about this, that we will talk about the great schools that our children have the opportunity to go to 10 years from now, that many of which may not even exist today or look very different than what exists today. Because I think the opportunity to innovate in education is virtually unlimited and has been really untested to a large extent. So I'm very hopeful that we'll have that opportunity and that opportunity for that kind of conversation.
Well, I think we will, and I hope that the committee sees it in their actions to make sure that you're at the helm of the Department of Education. As I look across America and as I look across the world, I see an age where technology is going to impact things that we didn't even dream about 5 years ago. That what we've seen happen to our PDAs is now going into healthcare. It's going to drive manufacturing. I still remember my father at 90 years old looking at me just about 5 years ago, 6 years ago, and saying, I don't understand how a fax machine works. Well, you know what? I never was able to explain to him. But that didn't limit my use of it and my belief that it served an important purpose. So education is going to change drastically. But what's most important is to have somebody passionate at the top, concerned about every child and every child's opportunity. For that, I'm grateful you're here. I yield.
Thank you, Senator.
Thank you, Senator Burr. Senator Kaine.
Thank you to our committee leadership, and thank you, Mrs. DeVos. How much information do you have about the finances of the president-elect, his family, or Trump-related organizations?
I don't have any of that information, Senator.
So I take it that you won't have any way of knowing, when asked by the president to take official action in your capacity as secretary, how those actions might affect his personal financial situation.
I'm not sure I could comment on that.
And this isn't theoretical. He owns a university. I think it's relevant to assessing the wisdom of an education policy proposal to know how that proposal might affect the president's personal finances. Do you disagree with me?
Well, I think the president-elect has taken steps to ensure.
Can I ask, do you disagree with me? Is it?
Can you state your question again?
I think it's relevant to assessing the wisdom of an education policy proposal to know how the proposal might affect the president's personal finances. Do you disagree with me?
I don't disagree with you.
Okay, thank you. The nation deserves a Secretary of Education who's a champion of kids, parents, state and local control, and outcomes. And I also think the nation deserves a Secretary who's a champion of public education. In a 2015 speech on education, you were pretty blunt, quote, "Government really sucks." And you called the public school system a, quote, "dead end." In order to clarify, you never attended a public school, K-12 school, did you?
Correct.
And your children did not either, correct?
That's correct.
And you've never taught at a K-12 public school, correct?
I've not, but I've mentored in one.
Okay. I worry about the effect of a leader who believes government sucks on the morale of the workforce. Teachers and others do better when their morale is high. Would you agree with me?
Absolutely, and I support great teachers.
And the attitude of a leader of an organization matters a lot to the morale of the workforce. Would you agree with me on that?
Absolutely, and just with reference to the quote that you
made.
made.
I would like to introduce that for the record. I don't have other questions about it, and I have a very limited amount of time. I want to move on to another quote. You and your husband spoke at a conference a number of years ago, and your husband said, this was not attributed to you, but you were together at the conference, if what I read is correct. The church has been displaced by the public school as the center for activity, the center of what goes on in the community. Thomas Jefferson didn't view public education as contrary to or competitive with church or religion. Do you?
I do not.
Do you think that schools that receive K-12 schools that receive government funding should meet the same accountability standards, outcome standards?
All schools that receive public funding should be accountable, yes.
Should meet the same accountability standards?
Yes, although you have different accountability standards between traditional public schools and charter schools.
But I'm really interested in this.
Okay,
Should everybody
well-
be on a level playing field? So public charter or private K-12 schools, if they receive taxpayer funding, they should meet the same accountability standards.
Yes, they should be very transparent with the information, and parents should have that information first and foremost.
And if confirmed, will you insist upon that equal accountability in any K-12 school or educational program that receives federal funding, whether public charter, or private?
I support accountability.
Equal accountability for all schools that receive federal funding.
I support accountability.
Okay, is that a yes or a no?
I support accountability.
Do you not want to answer my question?
I support accountability.
Okay, let me ask you this. I think all schools that receive taxpayer funding should be equally accountable. Do you agree with me or not?
Well, they don't. They're not today.
But I think they should. Do you agree with me or not?
Well, no, because...
You don't agree with me. Let me move to my next question. Should all K-12 schools receiving governmental funding be required to meet the requirements of the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act?
I think they already are.
Okay, but I'm asking you a should question, whether they are or not. We'll get into that later. Should all schools that receive
If schools...
taxpayer funding be required to meet the requirements of the Individuals with Disabilities in Education?
I think that is a matter that's best left to the states.
So some states might be good to kids with disabilities, and other states might not be so good, and then what, people can just move around the country if they don't like how their kids are being treated?
I think that's an issue that's best left to the states.
What about the federal requirement? It's a federal law, the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. Let's limit it to federal funding. If schools receive federal funding, should they be required to follow federal law, whether they're public charter, or private?
As the senator referred to...
Just yes or no? I've only got one more question.
The Florida program, there's many parents that are very happy with the program there.
Let me state this. I think all schools that receive federal funding, public charter, or private, should be required to meet the conditions of the Individuals with Disabilities in Education Act. Do you agree with me or not?
I think that is certainly worth discussion, and I would look forward
So
to
you cannot yet
discussing it
agree with
further.
me. And finally, should all K-12 schools receiving governmental funding be required to report the same information regarding instances of harassment, discipline, or bullying if they receive federal funding?
I think that federal funding certainly comes with strings attached.
I think all such schools should be required to report equally information about discipline, harassment, or bullying. Do you agree with me or not?
I would look forward to reviewing that provision.
If it was a court, I would say to the court, let the judge instruct the witness to answer the question. It's not a court, you're not under oath, or you're not under a subpoena, but you're trying to win my vote. Thanks, Mr. Chair.
Thanks, Senator Kane. Senator Murkowski.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mrs. DeVos, thank you for coming to my office. I had an opportunity to walk you through the map of Alaska, hopefully educate you to some of the challenges that we face as a state in delivering education in what is not a rural state, but what has been described as a frontier state in many, many ways. 82% of the communities in the state of Alaska are not attached by road. They are truly islanded in every sense of the word. I had an opportunity on Saturday to meet with about 400 teachers from around the state, and I will tell you, they are concerned about your nomination. They're concerned because they would love to have the choice that we're talking about. But when you are a small school in Buckland, when you are a small school in King Cove, when there is no way to get to an alternative option for your child, the best parent is left relying on a public school system that they demand to be there for their kids. So I want to make sure, and I think every one of those teachers that I met with on Saturday wants to make sure that your commitment to public education, particularly for our rural students who have no choices, is as strong and as robust as the passion that you have dedicated to advancing charter schools. Now, I appreciated your responses to Senator Cassidy because he was very direct and you gave very reassuring answers there that you are not seeking to undermine or to erode public schools. I appreciated what you said in response to Senator Alexander's, the chair's questions, about whether you would work to move towards a voucher type of a system if, in fact, we in the Congress said, no, that is not the direction. I tried to assure the teachers that I was talking to that there are not sufficient votes to what I called voucherize the system. I appreciated the inquiry that Senator Kaine has been making, though, about the level of accountability. And this was something that was brought up in the Q&A section there in Anchorage, was that a concern that there would not be an effort to match that accountability to those schools that received federal funding, either through a voucher program, a federal match through education savings account dollars, but that in addition to performance standards, that there would be true accountability with adhering to federal laws for civil rights as well as students with disabilities. So I will ask for continuation of that discussion. You have, I think, provided some very responsive comments that I think will help our teachers in Alaska, where, again, their options and their choices are very limited. But how can you provide assurance to these teachers, these families, these students, for whom alternatives and options are severely limited, not because we don't want them, but our geography really isolates us?
Well, thank you, Senator, for that question, and I really appreciated our conversation and a review of the map, because it does remind us how these unique challenges that Alaska has. And I would just say that I can assure you that if confirmed, that I will support Alaska in its approach to educating its youngsters, and that I have to say, I think that the creativity and innovation that Alaska has employed through the traditional public system is one that other states could probably take note of and learn some lessons from, and would hope that they would continue to feel that freedom and that drive to continue to educate and innovate.
Well, we are quite proud of some of the innovation that we have made. We have a great deal of choice within our urban centers. For my colleagues' education and edification, Anchorage hosts 6 of the most ethnically diverse schools in the United States of America. And we're sitting in Anchorage, Alaska. So I have that level of diversity, but then I have rural villages where I may have no more than 60 kids in a school. And in order for them to have the same benefits and opportunities, the dollars that flow, the commitment that flows to those families, that there is that level of accountability throughout, remains a very significant challenge. So I need to have a very clear and a very firm commitment that the focus that you will give to not only Alaska, but to states that have significant rural populations, that these students who will not have alternatives, that public school system is not undermined, eroded, or ignored.
Absolutely, Senator. You have my commitment. And in fact, as I said, I think that there's so much that Alaska can share with others in terms of how to address challenges of a very widespread student population.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
I'll now turn to Senator Murray.
Mr. Chairman, I just have to start by saying, and I hope this doesn't count against my time on questions, but it's not a question. For question's sake, I have questions that I know all of our committees want to follow up, including on the response I just heard on IDA, sexual assault, and Pell Grants, and a number of other questions. Let me just say I'm really disappointed that you have preemptively cut off our members from asking questions. It really is unprecedented. And you and I have worked together, and I appreciate that. But I hope you change your mind. I don't know what you're trying to protect Ms. DeVos from. She should get robust scrutiny. She's going to oversee the education of all of our kids. and what's happening in higher education, and much more. And to be very clear, this is not what we have done in this committee. For Michael Levitt, President Bush's second Secretary of Health and Human Services, 5 members participated in a second round. For Andrew von Eschenbach, President Bush's third FDA commissioner, 3 members participated in a second round. Hilda Solis, President Obama's first Secretary of Labor, 3 members participated in a second round. The hearing was actually over 4 hours. Tom Daschle, President Obama's nominee to be Secretary of Health and Human Services, 4 members participated in a second round. Alexis Herman, President Clinton's second Secretary of Labor, 3.5-hour hearing, 10 minutes of questioning. Rod Page, as I mentioned, Secretary of Education, President Bush's nominee, 10 questions. So I hope we're not just cherry-picking Secretary Duncan and King, who had a long, broad history behind them when they came to this. And I really would like to enter these transcripts that I have showing the actual precedent of this committee into the record. I think it's important for all of us to remember that. And given the lack of paperwork from the OGE and the numerous outstanding questions that I know my members have, they're still sitting here. It's 8:15 at night. They wouldn't be sitting here if they didn't have additional questions. I'd like to call at least for a second hearing for this nominee.
Well, you want me to respond to that now?
I would like
And then
to.
will you have additional
I
questions
do have additional
yourself?
questions, yes.
Well, let me respond in this way. You know the respect I have for you and for each member of this committee and for how we've worked together. But what you're asking me to do is to treat Mrs. DeVos differently than we treated President Obama's 2 education secretaries. And I'm not going to do that. I mean, we're already at, this hearing started at 5:15, it's 8:15. That's 3 hours and 5 minutes of questions. Secretary Duncan, President Obama's first secretary, the hearing was 2 hours and 2 minutes. John King, President Obama's current secretary, was 2 hours and 16 minutes. This is already 3 hours, and we're not finished yet. As far as questions go, each member of this committee has had an opportunity to visit with Mrs. DeVos in their office, and I believe she has done that. Several members of this committee have already sent her written questions, which she will answer before we vote on her nomination. She has complied with all the rules of the committee. The committee rules do not require that the Office of Government Ethics Office of Government Ethics report be in by the time we actually have a hearing. She submitted her information there on the 12th of, I believe, the 12th. And Mrs. DeVos, I understand you are working and will continue to work with the Office of Government Ethics and sign an ethics agreement. Is that correct?
That's correct, Mr. Chairman.
And the purpose of that, just for those watching, is there's a designated government office that works with nominees and that comes to an agreement with them if there is any conflict of interest. And if she, for example, needs to divest herself of something, that will be part of the agreement. She has said that she will do whatever she needs to do to gain an agreement with the Office of Government Ethics so that the letter of agreement will say she has no conflicts of interest. I have said that that letter will be public at least by Friday before we vote on her nomination by next Tuesday. So you will have the opportunity to question her in your office, to question her today as extensively as you did either of President Obama's nominees. You'll have an opportunity to submit additional written questions after this hearing for up to 2 days. When we had Secretary Perez before the committee, Senator Harkin only gave us 1 day. I would say 2 days, that's by the close of Thursday. And then you will have 3 or 4 days after the Office of Government Ethics letter of agreement saying she has no conflicts of interest is public to decide how to vote. That seems to me to be entirely reasonable. I've already agreed to move the hearing 1 week at the request of the Democratic and Republican leadership so they could consider other nominations. And finally, on the tax returns issue, it is not a requirement of this committee that nominees provide us with their tax returns. They provide us with their financial information, just as senators do, provide publicly their financial information. It is not a law that she provide her tax returns. So she's doing everything that the rules of the committee say she should do, and I'm treating her in terms of questions in the same way that we treated President Obama's 2 education secretaries. So I'm not going to have a second round. I'll be happy to extend to you, if you would like, a chance to ask questions, and then I will do the same, which is consistent with what we did with the two previous Obama secretaries.
Well, Mr. Chairman, with all due respect, this nominee is the only one to not submit an OGE paperwork before our hearing. So our members have not had a chance to review it or to ask questions about it. And I appreciate private meetings, I'm sure we all do, but all of our constituents want to hear what this nominee has to say too, because of a vast history on the issue of education that concerns a lot of people. So
well, if I may...
let me just say that Tillerson had 3 rounds of hearing, Sessions had 2 rounds, Carson had 2 rounds, Zinke had 3 rounds. So I'm unclear why education is not just as important as these others.
If it's important under Trump, it's important under Obama. I mean, I don't know why suddenly we have this sudden interest. And as far as, I mean, several people have mentioned Secretary Page here tonight. He didn't have his Office of Government Ethics letter in before his hearing. It came in after his hearing. The same was true with Elaine Chao when she became a cabinet member. So that's not been a consistent pattern either. I've tried to be as fair as I can in following what I believe to be the golden rule, and we've gone for more than 3 hours in an extensive hearing, which is simply part of a discussion as you evaluate how you're going to vote when it comes up before the committee.
Well,
Mr. Chairman?
Yes, Senator
I think the request is reasonable. We're only asking for 5 minutes per member on a set of issues that are this important at the beginning of a new administration, which is a change in party. A lot of new policies coming forward. And as Senator Murray said, we did have time in our office. I think most of us probably had a half an hour, but our constituents weren't there for a half an hour. So asking for another 5 minutes, I don't think is in any way unreasonable.
Well, Senator Casey, I have enormous respect for you, but the Obama administration was also a change in administration, and I didn't hear any great cry for a second round of questions
but
there.
Mr. Chairman,
this is a 3-hour hearing, 3 hours and 10 minutes now, in addition to all the other information that's there, and I don't think it's fair to expect that we'll treat a Republican president's education nominee differently than we created a Democratic president's education nominee. Senator Bennett?
Mr. Chairman, I think you're one of the fairest people in this town.
So, thank you for saying that.
And no, you've earned that. You really are. But to me, the fact that Republican members of the Senate did not want to ask a second round of questions for the Obama nominees to the Senate, the idea that that should be a precedent for the Democrats, 8 of whom are here tonight, to ask questions, even follow-ups to questions that we've heard tonight, I think is really unfair and uncharacteristic. And I hope that if we can't have this hearing, that we will have, or we can't have the questions here, that we'll have another hearing. If we can't have another hearing, that we have an assurance that every single question asked by every single member of this panel and submitted in writing is answered before this vote can go forward on the floor, that the paperwork is submitted before we can go forward on the floor. I don't think that's a satisfactory result, but if we can't ask the questions today, I hope you and the majority leader will consider that.
I've already said that members will have an opportunity to ask questions in writing, which they already have. Many of you have already done that, to ask additional questions in writing if you have them in by 5 p.m. on Thursday. And I also said that's one more day than Senator Harkin gave us when Perez was a labor secretary. I said that's fair. I said second, that we'll schedule an executive session on next Tuesday when we'll be glad to discuss the tax return issue, whether we want to apply tax returns to future nominees who come before this committee. And we'll vote on Ms. DeVos, but only if the letter agreement with the Office of Government Ethics is complete by this Friday and made available to all members of the committee, so you have 3 or 4 days to see how that might affect your vote.
Mr. Chairman, very short question.
Senator Franken.
Are we assured that before this vote on Tuesday that we will have the answers to these questions? Because what I've heard is that we can submit the questions, but here, at least the nominee has to answer them. Are you assuring us that before the vote on Tuesday, our questions will have been answered?
Well, and, you know, the number of questions needs to be reasonable and the answers need to be reasonable, and that's in the eye of the beholder sometime. The number of questions, the most number of questions that was ever asked a nominee before this committee, I'm told, was 191 to Secretary Perez. I won't say there's a certain number that is reasonable, and then I'm confident that Mrs. DeVos will make every effort to give a reasonable and as complete an answer to the question as she can.
But the answer is
Before-
no, we won't be assured of that.
Well, yeah, you'll be assured that, Mrs. DeVos, what would your answer to that be? What will you do your best to answer the
would
questions that you will receive after 5 o'clock on Thursday before the possibility of a vote on next Tuesday?
Would certainly endeavor to have all of the questions responded to.
Senator Baldwin.
Mr. Chairman, did you make any announcements about whether there will be more than one round of questions tomorrow when we convene to hear Mr. Price's, Representative Price's?
I was not planning on more than one.
Because I heard various members who have done the research during the course of this proceeding indicate that there have been additional rounds for witnesses who have, or nominees who have come before this committee for other departments than education. And I can tell you that perhaps I perhaps got a chance to propound half of my questions today. Tomorrow, given the breadth of that department, I have many, many more.
Well, since I'm talking a lot about precedent tonight, let me look at the precedent and see what that says. I told Dr. Price that there would be, that in my experience, one round of questions would pretty well do it, except usually we had Senator Murray and I followed up, and occasionally Senator Warren does. She's a diligent member of the committee and is often here. I congratulate her for that. But let me think about that.
Mr. Chairman, can I just ask about the precedent, just because I want to make sure I understand it? When we go back and examine the record, will we find instances where people asked for a second round of questions and were refused?
Will you find instances where they were asked and refused? I don't know the answer to that, but if you go back to President Obama's 2 education secretaries, there was one round of 5-minute questions. And then the chairman asked a question and one other senator asked a question, and that's what we're doing tonight.
Well, but as you said in that hearing, I think we have time for a second round. Those were your words. And then you said, Senator Warren, you can be the first in the second round, which I believe to mean, had there been anyone else who wanted to ask a question, they could have, that no one was refused the opportunity to ask. It's just that people were satisfied with the nominee and had no further questions.
Well, I can guarantee you that many of us were not satisfied with the last nominee, but out of deference to the president and the institution, thought that it would be appropriate for us to defer to the president and that it was important to have a secretary in place. You're a very exceptional law professor, and I don't want to get into that kind of discussion with you. I think my guess is that I looked over there and saw you, and you asked if there could be a second round, and I said yes. So I think we're the only ones still in the room. We have to bring this to a conclusion. I think Ms. DeVos has. I think we're not going to have a second round of questions tonight.
But, Mr. Chairman, I just want to be clear then. then this is the first time ever that someone has asked for a second round and been refused?
No, no, no. No one ever said that except you.
Well, but you haven't said otherwise.
No, well, now that's an Allison, I mean, Lewis Carroll would be proud of that. I mean, that's a
I'm
little,
sorry.
that's a little exceptional.
Did you say that you had refused anyone a second round?
No, I said Lewis Carroll would be proud of that kind of reasoning. What I'm saying is I looked straightforwardly at the process that we had with President Obama's education secretaries and determined that we would do the same thing for President-elect Trump's nominee. If I were to be even more careful, I would point out that she's now spent 50% more time here in this hearing than either Secretary Duncan or Secretary King did for President Obama. She's visited every one of your offices. She asked to go in December. Nobody made time to see her in December, so she came in January. I believe that's correct. And then she's received questions from you, which she's going to answer. We have said that she's completed the FBI background. She's followed every rule the committee has. I've said we will consider the tax return question at an executive session next week about whether we want to change the rules and require that of future nominees. You can decide to do that if you wish to do that. We senators don't do it for ourselves, and we don't do it for our nominees, so we can talk about that. And that you'll have 2 days to ask additional written questions. She'll do her a reasonable number of them. She'll do her best to give you reasonable answers to them, and that we will not go forward with a vote on next Tuesday unless her letter agreement is public by Friday and available for you to review it. So that's my decision, and I think that's what we'll do tonight. Now, we'll conclude the hearing by inviting Senator Murray, if she has any additional questions to ask, to do that. Then I'll ask some, and then we'll be finished.
So, Mr. Chairman, I take that as a definitive answer?
That's as definitive as I can be.
Well, since I only have one question, I'll ask one you probably won't like. Mrs. DeVos, President-elect Trump was recorded bragging about kissing and groping and trying to have sex with women without their consent. He said on tape that when you're a star, they let you do it. You can do anything. I was, and I remain, very outraged by those comments. And that outrage grew following the release of that recording as a series of women came forward to publicly accuse President-elect Trump of exactly the type of behavior he bragged about on that tape. I take accusations of this type of behavior very seriously. If this behavior, kissing and touching women and girls without their consent, happened in a school, would you consider it a sexual assault?
Yes.
1 in 5 young women will experience sexual assault while in college. We are joined tonight by several sexual assault survivors who are brave enough to come here tonight because this issue is so important to them. Can you promise them and me that you will not, as has been in the press, consider, quote, reining in the Office for Civil Rights and the department's work to protect students from campus sexual assault?
Senator, if confirmed, I commit that I will be looking very closely at how this has been regulated and handled, and with great sensitivity to those who are victims, and also considering perpetrators as well. But please know that I am very sensitive to this.
I've heard you say that, but you will not take back the words that you will rein in the Office for Civil Rights.
I don't believe those were the words that I used.
Well, that is a quote that's been attributed to you. We've spent, I thank Senator Casey on this as well. This is extremely important to women and men across the country, and I hope that you will take back the words of reining in the Office of Civil Rights and the department's work on sexual assault. Mr. Chairman, I'm going to turn to Senator Hassan for the last part of my questions.
Thank you, Senator Murray. Just 2 quick things, Ms. DeVos. I just wanted to clarify the issue about whether you were on the board of your mother's foundation. I have 990s up through 2013 where you're listed as the vice president and a board member. So was that just a mistake on your part?
That was a clerical error. I can assure you, I have never made decisions on my mother's behalf on her foundation board.
So the listing that you're the vice president of the board is incorrect?
That is incorrect.
Okay, thank you. The other thing I just wanted to circle back to, I want to go back to the Individual with Disabilities in Education Act. That's a federal civil rights law. So do you stand by your statement a few minutes ago that it should be up to the states whether to follow it?
The law must be followed, federal law must be followed where federal dollars are in play.
So were you unaware when I just asked you about the IDEA that it was a federal law?
I may have confused it.
It guarantees absolutely basic protections to students with disabilities to ensure that they are afforded a high-quality education with their peers. One of the reasons that it is difficult to have this hearing and feel that we fully understand your perspective is because we do know that children with disabilities in at least some of the voucher programs that you have supported have gone with a voucher to a school because of their disability, had to leave the school keeps the money, and they go back to public schools that now have even less resources to deal with them. And many of us see this as the potential for turning our public schools into warehouses for the most challenging kids with disabilities or other kinds of particular issues, or the kids whose parents can't afford to make up the difference between the voucher and the cost of private school tuition. So I just would urge you to become familiar, should you be nominated, with the Individual with Disabilities in Education Act. And I do have to say, I'm concerned that you seem so unfamiliar with it and that you seem to support voucher schools that have not honored, have made students sign away their rights to make sure that the law is enforced. That's very troubling to me.
Senator, I assure you that if confirmed, I will be very sensitive to the needs of special needs students and the policies surrounding that.
And with all due respect, it's not about sensitivity, although that helps. It's about being willing to enforce the law to make sure that my child and every child has the same access to public education, high-quality public education. And the reality is that the way the voucher systems that you have supported work don't always come out that way. And that's why it's something we need to continue to explore. Thank you.
Certainly.
Thank you, Senator Hassan, Senator Murray. Thank you, Ms. DeVos, for being here. I appreciate your being here for 3 hours and 15 minutes and giving us a chance to ask you questions. You've set a record in terms of the last 3 education secretaries in any event. I'm going to put in the record with consent a letter from the Log Cabin Republicans who wrote to me as chairman of the committee about a suggestion that you might be anti-gay. According to Gregory T. Angelo, president, he said, far from being an anti-gay fire breather, Mrs. DeVos actually has a history of working with and supporting gay individuals. When her senior advisor, Greg McNeely, was accosted by a Michigan state senator who threatened to make his sexual orientation a matter of public record because of his opposition to a constitutional amendment banning marriage equality, Mrs. DeVos put an end to the bullying and harassment. Furthermore, in 2013, Mrs. DeVos called for the resignation of then Republican National Committeeman Dave Ajima for posting erroneous and vitriolic anti-gay statements online. Mrs. DeVos should be commended for proving that differences of opinion related to marriage equality do not equate to anti-gay animus. Log Cabin Republicans stand in support of her nomination for Secretary of Education and encourages her swift confirmation. If senators wish to ask additional questions of our nominee, those are due by the close of business on Thursday, January the 19th. For all other matters, the hearing record will remain open for 10 days. Members may submit additional information for the record within that time. The next hearing of our committee will be tomorrow morning at 10 o'clock on the nomination of Tom Price for the United States Secretary of Health and Human Services. Thank you for being here today.
Mr. Chairman, I also have a letter I'd just like to have put in the record as well from the Massachusetts Charter Public School Association, raising questions about accountability. They're strong supporters of charter schools, but they are very concerned about Ms. DeVos's record with accountability for charter schools in Michigan.
Thank you, Senator Warren. It will be included in the record. The committee will stand adjourned.
Mr. Chairman, Senator Bennett.
do it to somebody.
Well, let me unadjourn the committee for a moment. Were you trying to get my attention?
I had a suggestion that I hope might resolve the problem earlier, which is, my understanding is that under Rule 26 of the Standing Rules of the Senate, 3 of us have the right to ask you to call minority witnesses before the committee to whom we could address questions. And maybe that's a way through this. So I'd make that request, assuming that...
Well, that request has been made earlier, and I've denied it. We've not done that. In my experience, that would mean our tradition is to invite the nominee, ask the nominee questions, which we've done. They go through the process, which I've described at length. So I appreciate your request, but I'm not going to agree to it. The committee's adjourned.